You're about to step into a dimension that doesn't play by the rules, not the laws of logic, not the expectations of common sense, and definitely not the comforting boundaries of traditional science. These are not your average experiments, with neat little graphs and polite peer reviews. No, these are the beautifully broken tests of reality. The moments when humanity looked at the universe, poked it with a stick, and the universe laughed back, because sometimes science doesn't reveal clarity. Sometimes it cracks open a hole in the ceiling of reason and dares you to stare into it. Welcome to the edge of understanding, where scientists have willingly trapped themselves in mirrored rooms, convinced themselves that free will is a joke, recorded thoughts that don't belong to them, and built machines that question time itself. These experiments didn't just stretch the boundaries of science, they shattered them. What you're about to hear is the backstage tour of scientific history, but one where the curtains are still twitching, the lights flicker without cause, and the actors forget their lines halfway through because the script rewrites itself in real time. Let's be clear, none of this is theory. These are real experiments. Designed, conducted, repeated, and in many cases, never fully explained. Take a deep breath. Because in this world, particles know when you're watching. Choices you haven't made yet still influence the present. And memories? They might just be illusions your brain creates on demand to keep you sane. It starts innocently enough. A researcher wants to understand perception. A psychologist wants to know how people make decisions. A physicist wonders whether time has a preferred direction. But then something slips. A result too strange to dismiss, too consistent to be. An error. They repeat it. The same outcome. They publish. Others repeat it. Same again. The findings don't just hold up. They haunt the field. Suddenly, the lab becomes a philosophical battleground. Science, which once stood on the firm soil of objectivity, now finds itself knee-deep in paradox. Where does consciousness begin? Can matter think? Is observation a physical force? Does time flow, or are we just trained to believe it does? You'll hear about a cat that's both alive and dead, but that's just the welcome mat. The real weirdness lies in the invisible choices made by electrons and voices recorded from people who never spoke, in a machine that knows what button you're going to press before you even do. You'll meet split brains that argue with themselves, patients whose memories were surgically removed, but somehow remembered anyway. And neural experiments that suggest you're just watching your life unfold on a delay, and someone else might be holding the remote. These aren't urban legends. They're not pseudoscience. Every case you're about to experience was tested in real institutions, under real conditions, by real scientists who did not set out to discover madness. They wanted clarity. And what they found instead was a crack in the code. These bizarre experiments changed science, not because they gave us answers, but because they demanded better questions. They refused to be boxed into neat explanations. They forced entire fields to evolve. Physics began to whisper to philosophy. Psychology tangled with neurology. Biology stared at the mirror of consciousness and didn't like what it saw. These experiments blurred the lines between observer and observed, subject and object, dream and data. And so here you are, 3 hours ahead of you, staring into the haunted archives of human curiosity. This isn't science for grades or grant money. This is science for truth. The ugly, impossible, paradoxical kind. The kind that doesn't fit on a whiteboard or a TED Talk. The kind that crawls under your skin at 2 a.m. and makes you wonder if you ever had free will at all. And maybe, just maybe, by the end of this journey, you'll start to see reality not as a solid wall of facts, but as a shifting landscape of illusions, feedback loops, and uncomfortable truths. A place where observation changes outcome, and the future has already sent its memo to the past. So lay back. Keep your eyes half open. Let your mind sink into this hypnotic exploration of what happens when science stops making sense and becomes something more. A mirror that breaks while you're still inside it. The experiments are real. The consequences are ongoing, and your mind is not ready. You're standing in front of a machine. It's small, metallic, humming quietly, unassuming, really. Inside it, an electron is about to pass through two tiny slits in a barrier. You hit a switch, the electron fires. And what happens next should be simple. It should go through one slit or the other, like a marble rolling down a hallway. That's how physical reality works, right? Wrong. Because when you're not watching, the electron doesn't behave like a marble. It behaves like a wave spreading out, interfering with itself, creating a pattern on the wall behind the slits that makes no classical sense. A kind of pattern only a probability cloud would make. It's as if the electron went through both slits at the same time, but then you decide to observe it, just to be sure. You set up a tiny detector to see which slit the electron actually goes through. You fire again. The result? The interferent pattern disappears. Just like that. The electron now chooses one slit. The wave behavior vanishes. The quantum ghost is gone. What just happened? This is the infamous double slit experiment, the haunted house of quantum mechanics. First performed in a crude form by Thomas Young in the 1800s with light, and later refined. For electrons and atoms, it revealed something absurd. The act of observation collapses the wave function. It forces the particle to choose. Watching changes reality. Let that sit for a moment. The universe behaves differently depending on whether or not you look at it. Science, built on the idea of passive observation, suddenly finds itself in a philosophical death spiral. Because this isn't just an experimental hiccup. It's been repeated over and over across decades and technologies. Electrons, photons, even entire molecules, the outcome is the same. No observer. The particle behaves like a wave. Observer present. It collapses into one location, one reality. And here's where it gets worse. You don't even need a human observer. Any measuring device counts, even if no one checks the data, even if it's erased. The universe somehow knows it was being watched. As if reality doesn't exist in a definite state until it is forced to. Until something asks. This simple experiment unraveled everything we thought we knew about objectivity. It revealed that reality, at a fundamental level, is participatory, and that's terrifying. Because it means there's no such thing as detached observation. No pure science. The observer is always in the equation. You are always in the equation, but it gets weirder. Physicist John Wheeler proposed a variation called the delayed choice experiment. Here, the decision to observe is made after the particle has already passed the slits, yet somehow it still affects whether the particle behaved like a wave or a particle in the past. It's as if the future choice rewrote history. The observer doesn't just change the outcome, they retroactively change what happened. Now imagine you're not a scientist, but a philosopher. You hear this and think, wait, does this mean reality is a mental construct? That it doesn't exist until something experiences it? Are we co-creating the universe second by second with our awareness? Some took that path. Others resisted, clinging to interpretations like many worlds, the idea that every possible outcome still happens, but in separate branching universes. In one, the electron went left. In another, right? In another, it went both ways, singing a little song. But you'll never see those universes. You're trapped in one branch. You're the observer, and here's the ultimate mind twist. If observation collapses the wave function, what does that say about you? What is your consciousness made of? Is your brain also a quantum system? Does your act of observing yourself change the self that you're observing? Are you collapsing your own wave function every time you ask who you are? Some researchers believe this is more than just poetic. Quantum cognition theorists explore the idea that the brain's decision-making processes might mirror quantum phenomena, superpositions of thought, delayed collapse of intention, probability interference in memory recall. Maybe the double slit isn't just physics. Maybe it's the blueprint of consciousness self. So here you are, a mind observing a universe that responds to being watched, a particle deciding how to behave based on attention, An experiment so simple a high school student could recreate it, and so profound that the smartest people in the world still argue about what it means. Observer alters. Outcome isn't just a scientific result. It's a metaphysical threat. A paradox that sits at the core of everything we think we know. It whispers reality is not neutral. It's not passive. It's not waiting to be discovered that it's changing. Because you're here, and whether that terrifies you or liberates you, you can't unsee it. Picture this. You flip a coin. It lands on heads. Seems simple, right? A moment in time, moving forward, cause followed by effect. You flipped it, it landed, the result followed the action. That's how time works. Or at least, that's what we've told ourselves. But what if the result, that heads or tails, somehow influenced the moment you decided to flip it at all? Now hold that feeling and follow me into the strange depths of retrocausality, the theory that the future can influence the past, not metaphorically, not emotionally. Literally, don't enter the experiment by psychologist Benjamin Libet in the 1980s. He wanted to measure how long it takes for someone to consciously decide to move. Seems innocent. Participants were asked to flick their wrists whenever they wanted, and then note the exact time they felt the urge to move. All while their brain activity was being monitored via simple hypothesis. The brain should show a spike after the person decides. That's how conscious decision-making works, right? Wrong. What Libet found was stunning and disturbing. The brain's motor cortex showed a spike in readiness up to 350 milliseconds before the participant reported deciding to move. In other words, their body prepared for action before they knew they had made a choice. The conscious mind was notified. After the fact, imagine your body already reaching for a cookie, while your brain is still giving a TED talk about willpower, and it didn't stop their dot-follow-dash-up experiments, like those by Soon, Brass, and Haynes in the early 2000s. Used fMRI scanners to predict decisions 7 to 10 seconds before participants became aware of their choices 10 seconds. That says eternity in brain time. It's like your subconscious has been planning your life while your conscious self plays catch-up with a bad map and no GPS dot. So, what's happening? One interpretation is that time in the brain doesn't flow the way we experience it. Conscious awareness is like the evening news, a delayed broadcast, curated, edited, and sanitized for comfort. The raw footage, already filmed, maybe even scripted. Now enter quantum physics again. A 2007 experiment known as the quantum eraser took retrocausality to the next level. In it, entangled photons were fired at a screen, and the decision to erase or keep which path information, i.e., data about where the photon went, was made after the photon had already hit the screen, and yet, somehow, the photons. Past behavior changed depending on a future choice. Let's slow that down. Imagine you throw a ball, and only after it lands, you decide whether it curved left or right in midair. And your choice actually rewrites what happened during the throw. That's not science fiction. That's the quantum eraser. Suddenly, cause and effect are no longer chained together in a one-way street. Time starts to look more like a loop, or worse, a negotiation, which brings us to the paradox. If the future can influence the past, and the past is already influencing the present, where does agency live? Where do you live? You might think, okay, maybe this just applies to particles, not people. But here's the problem. You are made of particles, billions of them. And if those particles obey laws that allow time to wobble, bend, or fold, then what does that make your timeline? Some theories now suggest consciousness itself may be a time-smeared process, not localized to the present, but stretched like a ribbon across moments. Your decisions, your identity, your sense of now, may be an illusion maintained by a system trying to give itself continuity. Like a novelist writing the middle chapter before deciding how the story started, and perhaps even more unsettling. If time isn't strictly linear, then perhaps your future selves are already whispering into your present. That strange gut feeling, that out-of-nowhere idea, that sudden emotional reaction to a decision you haven't made yet, maybe that's your tomorrow self. reaching backward. Physicists Yakir Haranov and others have proposed two-time interpretations of quantum mechanics, suggesting that events are shaped by both past and future boundary conditions. It's not just about where things came from, but also where they're headed. Reality, in this view, is bidirectional, sculpted simultaneously by history and destiny. So here's the question you'll never unthink. If your brain can prepare an action before you're aware of it, if particles can choose based on future events, if time can flow backwards under the right rules, then how do you know your choices today aren't echoes from tomorrow? Time, it turns out, is not the solid river we thought it was. It's a fractured mirror, reflective in all directions, bending at strange angles, collapsing under close inspection. And as you move through this story, listening in your room, half asleep or wide-eyed, something profound starts to settle. And maybe your experience of time is just the shallow end of a much deeper current. A current where yesterday waits patiently for your next move. A current where cause and effect are holding hands in a cosmic feedback loop. Time waits backward is not just a glitch in physics. It's a warning from the future. Nothing you do is isolated. Nothing is truly past. And maybe, just maybe, you haven't made your first decision yet. There's a truth sitting in a room. It's complete, flawless. It exists whether or not anyone knows about it. Or at least, that's what you believe. That's what you've been taught. That truth is objective, independent, immune to attention, or perception. But now, imagine that no one sees this truth. No one knows it. No one can even verify it exists. Does it still count as truth? Welcome to the paradox of truth without witness. The quiet scream at the heart of science, knowledge, and consciousness itself. Let's start with Schrödinger. Yes, the cat guy. He posed the question to mock quantum mechanics, not support it. What if a cat is sealed in a box with a vial of poison that gets released based on a random quantum event? Say, a decaying atom? Until you open the box, the atom has neither decayed nor remained intact. It exists in superposition, both decayed and undecayed at once. Therefore, the cat is both alive and dead. Until observed, it's absurd, right? Except it's not. The math works. The logic holds. It's been tested not with cats, thankfully, but with particles, photons, molecules. Superposition is real. Things really can exist in multiple states simultaneously until measured. Now ask yourself, if something is both true and false, alive and dead, until observed, what does that say about truth itself? Is truth still truth if no one's there to see it? This bleeds directly into epistemology, the philosophy of knowledge. For centuries, truth was treated like a mountain, standing tall whether or not anyone climbed it. But what quantum mechanics, psychology, and even neuroscience have shown us is maybe truth is more like a fog. You see only what the light hits, and once you shine that light, the landscape changes. Let's go deeper. In 1961, physicist Eugene Wigner proposed a thought experiment. What happens when two observers disagree about a quantum system? Suppose Wigner's friend performs the Schrödinger's cat experiment inside a sealed lab. From the friend's perspective, once they observe the cat, it's either alive or dead. But to Wigner, standing outside the lab, the system is still in superposition. Both outcomes exist. Two observers, two realities, two truths, both correct relative to their knowledge, both incompatible. This became known as Wigner's friend paradox. And it wasn't just hypothetical. In 2019, researchers in Vienna and Brazil actually tested a version of it using entangled photons and isolated observers. The result? Observers could record conflicting realities with no universal true state to resolve the contradiction. In other words, truth, that sacred thing we build science and morality upon, may be observer dependent. Still with me? Good. Now let's ruin your understanding of memory. Studies by Elizabeth Loftus and others in the 1990s revealed how false memories can be implanted in people's minds. Detailed, vivid, emotional memories of events that never happened. Participants recalled entire scenarios, family vacations, accidents, crimes, with total confidence. But none of it was real. Their brains fabricated truth. So now, truth not only bends in physics, it collapses in psychology too. What about perception? Consider the famous invisible gorilla experiment. Participants watch a video and are asked to count basketball passes between players. In the middle of the clip, a person in a full gorilla costume walks through the scene, stops, beats their chest, and walks off. Half the viewers never notice. Not because they're stupid, but because their brain filters it out to stay focused. Their truth, their version of reality, omits a literal gorilla. If reality can hide a gorilla in plain sight, how many invisible truths pass through your life daily? This brings us to the philosophical heart of the paradox. If something is real, but never observed, remembered, recorded, or measured, does it matter? If no one bears witness to a truth, if no one confirms it, defends it, or suffers for it, is it still truth? Science assumes it is, that the universe exists whether or not humans are around. But science also requires verification, and verification requires a witness. The tension between those ideas never resolves. It's like a courtroom where the only evidence is sealed in a box, and opening it changes the verdict. In your daily life. This paradox is alive and kicking. That thought you never shared, that dream you forgot upon waking, that flash of intuition you ignored. Was it true? Did it matter? The world is filled with truths that die in silence, and yet we need them. We crave them. Humanity is built on the assumption that truth is out there, solid, waiting to be discovered. But perhaps that's a comforting illusion. Perhaps truth is less like a monument and more like a mirror revealing only what stares into it. You might think this makes truth meaningless. But it doesn't. It makes it fragile, alive, a creature that needs attention to breathe. And in that, it becomes sacred. Not because it's eternal, but because it's temporary. Conditional? Vulnerable to being forgotten. Double quotes truth without witness isn't just a paradox of physics or philosophy. It's the human condition. You are a creature made of blind spots, faulty memories, subjective perception, and yet somehow you still reach for truth. Not because it's guaranteed to be there, but because you're willing to see it. And maybe that's what truth really is. Not a fact, not an object, but a relationship between the world and the one brave enough to witness it. You know how dominoes work, right? One falls, it knocks over the next, and so on. A simple, satisfying chain of cause and effect. Now imagine this. The last domino falls and somehow knocks over the first one. No trick, no magician. Just a perfect circle of causality where the end causes the beginning and the beginning causes the end. Welcome to caused loop's effect. A paradox that strangles logic with its own rules. In this world, the neat arrow of time collapses into a recursive spiral, and causality, the foundation of everything from science to storytelling, eats its own tail. Let's begin with a thought experiment that's more than just thought. The bootstrap paradox. You're a scientist. You build a time machine. One day, a stranger appears and hands you a blueprint for that very time machine. You build it. Years later, you go back in time and hand your younger self the blueprint. Here's the question. Who created the blueprint? No one. It just exists cycling through time with no origin. It's like a book that's never written, only photocopied. The cause and effect form a loop with no clear start. And yet, everything appears consistent. The machine works. The timeline is intact, but the logic? Completely broken. This isn't just science fiction. Variants of this logic plague physics and philosophy alike. Take the Novikov self-consistency principle in general relativity. It suggests that time travel might be possible, but only if your actions in the past are already part of history. You can't change the past, but you might accidentally create it. Imagine going back in time to inspire Beethoven. playing him one of his symphonies so he can write it. He hears it, writes it down, and history unfolds. But where did the music come from? Not from Beethoven, not from you. It simply looped itself into existence. Now enter quantum mechanics. In 2009, a paper by physicist David Deutsch outlined how closed time-like curves, CTCs, loops in time permitted by Einstein's equations, could allow for paradox-free time travel. Deutsch proposed that quantum information inside the loop would self-consistently adjust to avoid contradictions. In other words, reality bends over backward to maintain the loop, even if it means denying any original cause. You could receive information from your future self and use it without ever knowing where it came from. The effect becomes its own cause. Sounds like magic. But the math works. This loops us directly into neuroscience. In 2011, neuroscientist Patrick Haggard's experiments with decision-making suggested something eerie. Participants were told to move their finger whenever they felt the urge, but the EEG detected brain signals initiating the motion before the conscious decision was made. Here's the kicker. When participants were told they'd soon need to move, the unconscious brain signals began even earlier, as if the knowledge of a future task influenced the body before the conscious mind caught on. It's not just the past causing the future. The future is reaching back to nudge the past. You felt this, that strange gut feeling, the sudden deja vu, the decision you made without thinking, that turned out to be perfect. Maybe those weren't accidents. Maybe you were caught in a feedback loop, a cause and effect circuit with no beginning. Just flow. Now, imagine this on a global scale. A scientist discovers a formula because she dreamed it. Years later, a student reads her paper, becomes a scientist, and one night dreams the same formula. The loop continues. Knowledge without a source. Truth passed along like an inheritance from nowhere. Even language plays into this. You learned words from others who learned them from others who learned them from who. Where did the first sentence come from? Who spoke first and what caused it? Somewhere in that chain, the beginning got lost, swallowed by the loop. The implications are cosmic. If causes can be effects and effects can be causes, then the entire story of the universe could be a loop narrative. A self-sustaining myth that just happens to be real. Maybe the Big Bang wasn't a beginning, but a rebound. Maybe existence didn't come from nothing, but from itself. Philosophers have wrestled with this for centuries. In Hindu cosmology, time is cyclical. In Nietzsche's eternal recurrence, your life is lived again and again, not linearly, but looped, infinitely repeated, with no start or end. You've been here before. You'll be here again. And again, and again. Because loop's effect isn't just a riddle. It's a demolition of linearity. It forces you to ask, if every event is caused by a prior one, where does the chain start? What if there is no chain, just a wheel spinning? And if that's true, how do you ever escape it? Here's a darker, what if some of your thoughts, your beliefs, your memories, don't come from a traceable cause? What if they're looped into your life? Handed down not by history, but by recursion, that dream you can't explain, that idea that just arrived. What if there are echoes, not of the past, but of the loop? You're sitting still, nothing's moving, no one's touching you. And yet, with a single thought, just the mental image of your hand lifting, your brain fires up as if it's already happening. Muscles tense, neurons light. Your body listens to something that hasn't occurred. It now imagine that same thought, repeated with focus, repetition, and belief begins to change your flesh. Welcome to thoughts, create flesh. A paradox that blurs the border between imagination and biology, revealing that the mind doesn't just sit atop the body like a passenger. Sometimes it grabs the wheel and rewires the engine. Let's begin with the placebo effect, one of the most replicated and deeply unsettling phenomena in all of medicine. A patient takes a sugar pill, told it's a painkiller, and their pain actually decreases. The Body produces real chemicals. Endorphins, dopamine, immune responses, all triggered by a belief. But it gets stranger in Parkinson's patients. Placebos have been shown to cause the brain to release actual dopamine, a neurotransmitter in short. Supplying the disease. In one case, an injection of saline led to measurable improvements in motor function. Not imagined. Not fake. Physiologically real. Belief became biology. Harvard researcher Ted Kapchuk ran a study in which patients were told they were receiving a placebo, no deception, and still, their symptoms improved. It's not just trickery. It's not about being fooled. The body, it seems, can respond to a thought even when the conscious mind knows it's just a thought. This leads to the dark twin of the placebo, the nocebo effect. If you believe something will harm you, even if it's inert, your body acts harmed. Increased blood pressure, nausea, headaches, even death. In some cases, people have died from overdoses on sugar pills, simply because they believed they were lethal. So what's happening? Your body is not a passive machine. It's a feedback loop of chemical, electrical, and perceptual systems, and thought, that quiet, invisible force, can infiltrate that loop. Thoughts affect hormone release. They trigger inflammation or reduce it. They sculpt brain plasticity. They change heart rate, digestion, and even gene expression. That's right, epigenetics, the science of how gene activity can be turned on or off without altering DNA, has shown that stress, belief, trauma, and mindset can all affect which genes get expressed. You think and your genome responds. Your thoughts reach into your blood. And this isn't limited to pathology. Elite athletes use mental rehearsal to improve physical performance. In a famous study, 2 groups were told to practice piano, one physically, one mentally. Both improved, but the mental group showed almost the same changes in motor cortex activity as the physical one. Their brains began rewiring as if their fingers were really moving. You can grow muscle strength through visualization. You can reduce pain through imagination. You can bleed slower, heal faster, breathe deeper, all through thought. So here comes the paradox. If the boundary between imagination and physicality is porous, where does your body end and your mind begin? You think you're anchored in the physical, that what you see, touch, and measure is primary, but science keeps pulling the rug. Mind affects body. Body affects mind. And neither is first. Here's where it gets CREEEI year. In 2015, scientists found that participants in a virtual reality experiment, who were given long arms in their digital avatars, began to unconsciously adjust their physical posture to match the digital body. Their brains accepted the fiction and told their muscles to obey. Your body obeys imagination. Now flip the mirror. Chronic stress, essentially negative imagination, can cause immune suppression, digestive issues, accelerated aging, and memory loss. It's not just in your head, it leaks into your cells. You fear something that hasn't happened, and your body suffers as if it already did. Fear is thought. Thought is real. Real means physical. And then there's the phenomenon of phantom limbs, where amputees still feel pain or movement in a limb that no longer exists. The brain doesn't wait for the body's permission. It holds the map, even if the territory is gone. Mirror therapy, literally tricking the brain with visual illusions, has been shown to reduce phantom pain. Illusion heals trauma. Thought calms flesh, but don't get comfortable. This works both ways. If your thoughts can create wellness, they can also create disease. Psychosomatic illness isn't fake. It's the body reacting to inner worlds. Nausea from grief. Ulcers from anxiety. Paralysis from trauma, not imagined, not pretend. Somatized, meaning turned into flesh. Now ask yourself, if the body changes based on thought, and thought arises from the brain, which is a part of the body, then what is doing the thinking? Where's the origin? What came first, the belief or the biology? You can't find it. Because in this paradox, cause and effect collapse into each other. The mind creates the body, and the body shapes the mind. It's a loop with no fixed start. A feedback echo that turns thought into skin, skin into feeling, feeling into thought. Thoughts create flesh isn't poetic. It's measurable. It's replicable. It's terrifying because it means you're not safe inside your body. You are never purely physical. You are the ghost inside your own machine, whispering commands that your cells cannot ignore. You are not just what you think. You are what your thoughts do to you. You've probably heard the phrase, silence speaks volumes. Usually, it's used in relationships. Someone doesn't text back, doesn't show up, doesn't say what you expected, and suddenly that absence feels louder than any answer. But what if this wasn't just metaphor? What if silence, literal, measurable silence, contained more signal than sound? Welcome to Silence Holds Signal, a paradox that takes the absence of input and turns it into information. It's the scientific riddle where not receiving a message becomes a message, where emptiness is full, where nothing becomes something, and where what isn't said changes what is. Let's begin with a strange experiment in neuroscience, the domain of sensory deprivation. In the 1950s. Researchers placed participants in soundproof rooms with no light, no temperature change, no movement. They were floating in isolation tanks, deprived of all external sensory input. What happened? Did their brains fall asleep? No. They began to hallucinate faces, voices, music, colors, entire dreamscapes. The silence of sensation didn't quiet the mind, it amplified it. When deprived of signal, the brain generated its own. You remove the world, and the mind fills the silence with something louder than sound itself. This phenomenon is now widely understood in cognitive science. Your brain is a prediction machine. It's not just passively receiving input, it's constantly guessing what should be there. When you remove the input, those predictions don't stop. They become unmoored. Internal noise rises in the vacuum. That's why people hear voices in silence. That's why tinnitus often begins after hearing loss. It's not the ears failing, it's the brain overcompensating for missing signal. Inventing sound out of silence. Now take that to the world of quantum physics, where silence can mean everything. In the quantum Zeno effect, a system can be frozen in its state simply by being observed repeatedly. The system is silent in the sense that nothing appears to change, but the very act of checking is what holds it there. No change becomes the change. Even stranger is the elixir. Weidmann bomb tester, a quantum thought experiment where you can detect a live bomb without ever triggering it. How? By placing the bomb in a setup where a photon has a 50-50th chance of being absorbed. If it is, the bomb explodes. But through clever quantum interference, it's possible to observe whether a bomb is live based on what doesn't happen. Based on the photon not being absorbed, you gain information from the silence. From the non-event, now look at communication. Theory. In Shannon's model of information transfer, a key concept is entropy, uncertainty in a message. If you can perfectly predict the next word in a sentence, that word contains no new information. It's empty of entropy. But if a silence appears where a word was expected, suddenly that gap is full of signal. Consider a text message. If someone always replies in 3 seconds, and now it's been 3 minutes, that absence means something. The brain begins interpreting the silence. Anxiety rises. Predictions scramble. The silence isn't just empty space. It's information, densely packed. This applies at every scale of life. Biology. In genetics, non-coding DNA, once called junk DNA, is now understood to play regulatory and structural roles. It doesn't say anything directly. It's silent. But its silence organizes the meaning around it. Music, the pauses between notes define the rhythm. Silence isn't just absence. It's structure. A symphony with no rests is noise. A message with no silence is static. Even psychology runs on this. Therapists are trained to wait, to use silence. A client pauses, expecting to be interrupted, but the silence grows. That gap becomes unbearable, so they fill it. And often, That's when the truth slips out. Not in what they meant to say, but in what they didn't mean to reveal. The signal was in the pause dot, so what's the paradox? Well, you're trained to value signal, light, sound, action, input. But the universe hides its deepest information in the gaps, in the pauses, in the negative space dot, and once you realize this, the world becomes unnerving, a missed heartbeat, a quiet street, a question left unanswered. These silences are not peaceful. They are saturated. They hold the weight of all possible meanings, suspended. Your brain cannot ignore them. Because silence is ambiguous, and ambiguity demands resolution. Your mind projects onto it, fills it, turns it into story dot, and here's the dark part. You can be haunted by silence. Think of the call that never came, the apology never spoken, the feeling that something is missing, though you can't say what. These are not absences, they're events. They shape you, sometimes more than any actual action ever could. Silence holds signal isn't just a quirk of language or science. It's a structural truth. Reality speaks not only in waves and particles, but in voids, in absences, in what refuses to. Appear dot, and it forces a new kind of awareness, one where noticing what's missing becomes more important than noticing what's present. Because in the silence, the brain screams dot in the quiet, the truth slips out. And in the space where nothing should be, you might find everything. You blink, you reach for your phone, you scratch your arm. You don't think about doing these things. You just do them. The action flows. No hesitation, no narration, no little voice in your head shouting, now lift the hand. And yet, somehow it happens. Now rewind. Who did that? Welcome to Action Without Actor, a paradox that peels back the illusion of control and exposes something eerie beneath. The possibility that the you doing the action might not exist, at least not in the way you think. Let's start with the myth of the pilot. The voice in your head, narrating your life, commenting on your choices, pretending to steer. This voice believes it's calling the shots. But neuroscience says otherwise. In 1983, Benjamin Libet ran a series of groundbreaking experiments. Participants were asked to move their wrist whenever they felt the urge and to note the exact moment they became aware of that decision. Meanwhile, EEG machines tracked their brain activity. What Libet found was unsettling. The brain showed a spike in activity, a readiness potential, hundreds of milliseconds before the person reported the conscious urge to move. In short, the brain had already made the decision before the person was aware of it, got your hand moved before you decided to move it. Other experiments have built on this, including brain scans that predict decisions. Several seconds before the subject is aware, you think you're choosing, but really, you're observing a choice that's already been made. Now we enter the terrain of illusion, specifically, the illusion of agency. Philosopher Daniel Dennett calls the conscious self a center of narrative gravity. Not a captain, but a story stitched together after the fact. A post hoc rationalization machine. And here's the catch. The illusion works. It's smooth, seamless. You feel like you're in control. But that's part of the system. The same way a movie tricks you into seeing motion in still frames. Your brain tricks you into seeing a unified self making unified decisions. But if you aren't making the decision, then who is? Now things get spooky in split brain patients. Individuals whose corpus callosum has been severed to treat epilepsy. The two hemispheres of the brain stop communicating. When researchers present different instructions to each half, the two sides act independently. One hand buttons the shirt, the other unbuttons it. One hand grabs a pencil, the other slaps it away. When asked to explain their behavior, the patient makes up stories not to lie, but because the narrative self must always create meaning. Even if it's inventing it on the spot, there is no singular actor. Just actions, and an interpreter trying to keep up. You see this in hypnosis, in automatic writing, in extreme flow states. In spiritual possession rituals, People report moving, speaking, even creating without feeling like they are the one doing it. They become vessels, channels, tools. But if these are exceptions, what if they're not? What if all action is like this and what we call will is just an after the fact caption on a photo that already happened? Even in normal life, consider this. When you reach for a glass of water, do you decide to activate the hundreds of muscles required for that task? Do you think through the choreography of tendons, joints, and neural signals? Of course not. It just happens, and yet you say, I get it. But the I in that sentence is a placeholder, a simplification, a convenient fiction. Here's where the paradox explodes. If action can occur without an actor, without a true self at the center, then what exactly are you? You are not your thoughts. They arise on their own. You are not your body. It functions without supervision. You are not your decisions. They are made before you're aware of them. You are a witness to a machine that pretends to be a person. This isn't just philosophy. This is biology. The autonomic nervous system regulates your heartbeat, your digestion, your immune responses. You don't instruct it. You don't even know how it works. And yet, here you are, alive, breathing, reacting. Your whole existence is an orchestra with no conductor, just patterns, impulses, and a brain trained to believe it's in charge. But here's the real twist. This illusion may be necessary. Evolution may have hardwired us to believe in the actor, because societies need accountability, and accountability requires an I, because without it, morality, law, memory, and identity begin to unravel if no one is acting. Who takes the blame? Who gets the credit? Who stands on the stage? Action without actor is not just a scientific oddity. It's a crack in the mirror of consciousness. It's the silent truth behind every handshake, every sentence, every seemingly willful moment. And once you see it, really see it, everything changes. You stop taking ownership of every thought. You stop fighting the flow of impulse. You begin to wonder if life is happening through you, not because of you. And maybe that's liberation, not a loss of control, but the realization that control was never the point. Only awareness, only presence, only the silence between action and meaning. A silence your mind rushes to fill with the story of you. Imagine walking into a hallway filled with doors, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. You'll choose one eventually, but for now, they all remain closed, waiting. You reach for a handle, you pause, you decide, and just as you open door, you realize something strange. The hallway behind you has changed. It always led here, but now it feels like it never could have gone anywhere else. This is choice rewrites past. A paradox that suggests the decision you make in the present isn't just shaped by the past, it alters it, not metaphorically, not emotionally, mechanically. To understand this paradox, let's return to the experiment that keeps quantum physicists up at night, the delayed choice quantum eraser, a nightmare of logic developed from John Wheeler's ideas and tested by physicists like Yoon-Ho Kim in 1999. The setup goes like this. A photon is fired at a barrier with two slits. Behind the barrier is a detector screen, and in some versions, mirrors and beam splitters that complicate the photon's path. Crucially, researchers can choose whether or not to preserve which path information, i.e., whether they can tell which slit the photon went through. If you don't know which path it took, the photon behaves like a wave, going through both slits and interfering with itself. But if you do know, it behaves like a particle going through just one slit. So far, standard quantum weirdness. But here's the paradox. In the delayed choice version, the decision to preserve or erase which path information happens after the photon has already hit the screen. And yet, the interference pattern changes. Accordingly, it's as if the photon knows what decision will be made in the future, and behaves differently in the past based on that future choice. The future rewrites the past. Let that sit with you for a moment. A decision made in the present reaches backward and edits the conditions that led to it. Not symbolically, not as interpretation, but in how the data unfolds. as though time isn't a one-way street, but a feedback loop of choices, sculpting memories. And memories bending possibilities. Now step outside physics. And psychology. There's a strange phenomenon known as choice blindness. In one study, participants were asked to choose between two faces, who they found more attractive. But in some cases, researchers used sleight of hand to switch the photo after the choice was made, even when shown the face they didn't choose. Participants often justified their choice with confidence, as if that had been their pick all along. The mind rewrote the past to match the present. You chose it. Because you already chose it. Because you think you chose it. Memory doesn't resist this. In fact, it participates. Memory is reconstructive, not archival. When you remember something, you don't retrieve a file. You rebuild it using fragments, guesses, and whatever your current belief system suggests should be true. So if your present self needs a different story, your brain will rewrite the past to make it fit. This is why two people can live through the same event and recall it entirely differently. This is why trauma can lie dormant for years, then reemerge with different colors, different villains, different meanings. And this is why narrative identity, your sense of who you are, is always under revision. You think you're a character in a story, but in truth, you are also the author, editing chapter 1 based on how chapter 20 feels. Now take this into the social world. Political beliefs, religious conversions, personal regrets. We often make decisions and then retroactively reshape our memories to support them. That awkward moment wasn't really so bad. That old friend wasn't really that loyal. That job was never right anyway. You're not lying. You're reprocessing. The decision casts a shadow backward. The moment of choice becomes a lens that reshapes the road you took to get there. Even dreams seem to play with this. You wake up from a dream and suddenly the events in it feel like they always made sense, as if the absurd narrative you just invented had been running all night. Your brain is constantly performing temporal storytelling surgery, patching, stitching, and reordering the past to match the present narrative. But here's the danger. If your choices rewrite your past, how can you ever be sure of what's real? How many of your memories are edits? How many of your beliefs are just artifacts of decisions you had to justify? How much of your identity is built on scaffolding that didn't even exist until you told yourself it did? This isn't just about distortion. It's about causal reversal. The future reaches into the past and molds it to fit. In physics, this breaks chronology. In psychology, it warps responsibility. In consciousness, it erases the border between will and fate. And if all this is true, then what does that make free will? If your present choice changes what came before, if your current understanding redefines your own history, then who exactly is making the decision? And when choice rewrites past isn't a clever illusion, it's a built-in feature of how you experience time. A recursive loop disguised as a timeline. A decision that creates its own justification. And maybe that's the scariest truth of all. You didn't become who you are because of your past. Your past became what it is because of who you decided to be. Pick up a box. It's light. Too light. You shake it, expecting something inside, but it's empty. That should be the end of the story, right? No contents, no weight, no meaning. But now imagine this. The box feels heavier than it should. Not because of what's in it, but because of what's missing. The absence itself has mass. The emptiness presses back. This is the paradox of empty. Carries weight. The strange truth that nothing is never just nothing. That the absence of a thing can hold more force, more meaning, more pressure than its presence ever could. Let's start with something literal. Vacuum energy. According to quantum field theory, even the most perfect vacuum, a space stripped of all particles, all heat, all matter, isn't truly empty. Instead, it's seized with virtual particles constantly popping into and out of existence. These fluctuations can never be directly observed, but their effects are. In 1948, physicists Hendrik Casimir and Dirk Polder discovered that two uncharged Metal plates placed close together in a vacuum would attract one another. There was no force applied, no charge, no external pressure, and yet the plates moved. Why? Because the empty space between them contained less virtual particle activity than the space outside. The difference in energy densities caused a measurable force. That's right. Nothing, literal nothing, pulled the plates together. Emptiness created pressure. Now expand that to cosmology. The accelerating expansion of the universe is believed to be driven by dark energy, a mysterious form of energy woven into the fabric of space itself. It behaves like a negative pressure, pushing galaxies apart. But here's the kicker. This force is thought to emerge from the vacuum, from the energy of empty space. In other words, most of the weight of the universe might be coming from nothing. Empty carries weight. Now, let's jump to psychology, where this paradox shows up not in equations, but in emotions. Ever grieve someone who's still alive? Ever miss a conversation you never had? Ever feel the crushing presence of an unanswered question? That's the weight of emptiness. The absence of a thing becoming louder, more painful, more influential than its presence ever was. In trauma research, psychologists often talk about ambiguous loss, the pain of something undefined, a missing person, an unresolved breakup, a family secret no one will talk about. There's no closure, no body, no ending, and so the loss becomes heavier than death. Your brain is wired for meaning, for structure, for signal. So when a gap opens, when something expected is missing, your mind doesn't say, oh, well, it says, what does this mean? And it starts to build weight into the void. In many ways, absence becomes more active than presence. Consider silence in conversation, that awkward pause when someone says something, and no one replies. The room fills with tension. The silence isn't passive. It demands interpretation. It does something. Even in design, negative space, the areas where nothing exists give structure to the whole. A painting with no empty space is chaos. A melody with no rest is noise. A sentence with no punctuation is unreadable. Emptiness organizes meaning. It creates weight by being the frame that holds everything else. Back in neuroscience, your brain constantly fills in blind spots in your visual field. You don't see those gaps. Your mind auto-generates what should be there. But sometimes the absence becomes noticeable, and when it does, your awareness locks onto it. That one glitch in the pattern, that missing sound, that forgotten name. The whole becomes the focus. And in culture, we revere the invisible, we give power to the unknown. Gods, ghosts, conspiracies, secrets, not because we understand them, but because their absence of clarity gives them a strange gravity. The forbidden fruit isn't delicious because of its flavor. It's delicious because of its withheld experience. Now consider emotional memory. Sometimes it's not what happened that shapes you, but what never happened. The apology that never came. The love that was never returned. The opportunity that never arrived. These voids become landmarks in your identity, not despite being empty, but because of it. They shape your thoughts, your beliefs, your future, actions. So the paradox comes into focus. We think of emptiness as light, meaningless, hollow. But in reality, emptiness is dense, heavy, full of implication. It bends perception. It triggers reaction. It alters the flow of time and energy around it. And here's the final twist. In Buddhism, emptiness isn't seen as lack, but as potential. A canvas, a field of infinite possibility. When the mind releases attachment to form, it doesn't fall into despair. It finds freedom. The weight isn't in the object. It's in the craving. Empty carries weight until you stop lifting it. So now ask yourself, what in your life is missing, but still dragging behind you? What silence are you trying to explain? What nothing has shaped you more than any something? Because in the end, emptiness is never empty. It holds all the weight we give it. And sometimes that's the heaviest thing of all. Look in the mirror. You know who you are. Your name, your face, your memories, your coherent self, carried day to day like a backpack full of identity. But now imagine this, the lights are still on, your body still moves, your voice still speaks, but you no longer recognize the person behind the eyes. You've become conscious, but without a self. This is the paradox of mind forgets self, a disturbing, haunting rupture in the continuity of consciousness, where awareness remains, but the identity at its center disappears. Let's begin with a medical condition called depersonalization disorder. Those who experience it describe the sensation of watching themselves from outside their own body, like a ghost hovering behind a movie screen. They speak, they move, but they don't feel like it's really them. The self detaches. The mind is present, eerily aware, but disconnected from the sense of ownership. One patient put it like this: I know I exist, but I don't feel real. I'm watching someone else pretend to be me. What's terrifying is that their memory often remains intact. Their reasoning works. Their language, their actions, all appear normal. But behind the curtain, something vital has gone silent. The sense of I dot in neuroscience. This is linked to the default mode network, a collection of brain regions, active when we daydream, reflect, or think about ourselves. In depersonalization or trauma-induced dissociation, this network flickers, weakens, or desynchronizes. The result? The narrative of the self breaks apart, but it doesn't stop there. Now let's enter the phenomenon, transient. Global amnesia, a rare sudden loss of memory where a person forgets who they are, where they are, what year it is, but can still speak, move, smile, cry, and ask what's happening over and over. The mind stays online. But the self disappears, as if the book was torn from the reader's hands. Yet the hands still turn the pages. In a more extreme corner lies Capgras delusion, where a person becomes convinced that someone close to them has been replaced by an identical imposter. In rare cases, they turn that delusion inward. They look in the mirror and say, that's not me. Same face, same voice, different person. The self becomes a stranger. But it doesn't require pathology to experience this paradox. In fact, you felt it. Ever walked into a room and suddenly forgotten why you're there? Ever stared at your own name until it looked like nonsense? Ever spoken aloud and thought, who just said that? These micro glitches are harmless, but they hint at something deeper. The self isn't fixed. It's fragile. It's constructed, moment by moment. Even meditation, a practice meant to deepen awareness, often leads to experiences where the self dissolves. Advanced meditators report entering states where thoughts arise, sensations pass, awareness remains. But there's no center, no watcher, just observation, floating in space. It's called non-dual awareness. And while it sounds peaceful, it's also unsettling, because it forces a realization. You can be conscious without being someone. Now layer on split brain studies. In patients whose brain hemispheres were surgically separated, researchers discovered something unnerving. The two halves could operate independently, each with its own preferences, thoughts, and even beliefs. One hand picks up a book, the other slaps it away. When asked why, the patient's verbal side makes up a reason, unaware that it wasn't in charge. Two minds, one body. Neither in full control. This suggests that even in a normal brain, the self might not be a single voice, but a coalition, a fragile consensus. And when that consensus falters, when the orchestra loses conductor, the music continues. But no one claims to be playing. And here's the darkest twist. In Alzheimer's disease, the self doesn't vanish all at once. It disintegrates gradually. Memories crumble, faces become unrecognizable. The timeline collapses. But in some cases, emotional responses remain. A mother forgets her child's name, but still cries when she sees them. The feeling of connection lingers, even when the identity behind it has gone. The mind, stripped of itself, continues to echo. So now ask yourself, if your thoughts still happen without a stable self, if your actions still occur, if your memories can be rewritten and your name can be forgotten, but you remain in some strange form, then who or what are you? Are you the narrator? The actor? The memory? The observer? Or are you simply the space where all these things pass through? Mind forgets self isn't just a breakdown. It's a revelation that everything you call you, the name, the story, the preferences, the guilt, the pride might be a house of cards. Beautiful, necessary, but not required for consciousness. To continue dot, and if that's true, then maybe the thing you're most afraid to lose yourself was never as solid as you believed. Maybe you were never the thinker of your thoughts. Never the doer of your actions. Never the one behind the mask. Just the wind behind the curtain. Watching, feeling, forgetting, becoming. You walk into a room and your brain instantly starts labeling chair, window, light, phone, friend, safe, dangerous, beautiful, ugly. Without effort, without pause, you assign meaning to everything around you. A reflex so fast and automatic. You forget it's happening. You're not just perceiving the world, you're interpreting it. And that's where the trouble begins. This is the paradox of meaning hides reality, the strange and haunting truth that the more meaning we impose, the less reality we actually see. That your search to understand the world might be the very thing blinding you to what's real. Let's begin with the visual cortex, the part of your brain responsible for interpreting sight. It receives a flood of raw sensory input. But here's the trick. Only a fraction of what you see actually comes from your eyes. The rest is constructed. That's right. Most of your visual world is a guess, a predictive model generated by your brain, filled in with assumptions based on past experiences. You don't see reality. You see what your mind thinks should be there, dot in neuroscience. This is called predictive coding. Your brain doesn't wait for information. It projects forward. It anticipates. It creates a hypothesis and then checks it against incoming data. And if the data doesn't match, your brain often overwrites it to match the model. Meaning commies. First, reality follows dot in one study. People were shown ambiguous images, figures that could be interpreted as either a letter or a number. Depending on the context provided, the exact same symbol was seen differently. It wasn't the data that changed. It was the frame of meaning. Dot meaning distorted the truth. This happens every day. You see someone frowning, and depending on your beliefs about them, you might interpret it as anger, confusion, concentration, or contempt. The face doesn't change. The meaning does. And the meaning becomes your reality, but it gets deeper dot in language. Meaning compresses the world. You see a dog and your brain says, dog. And in that moment, you stop seeing the uniqueness of the creature in front of. You don't notice the exact rhythm of its breath, the strange twist in its fur, the subtle emotions in its eyes. The label has replaced the thing. Words are shortcuts, maps, not territories. But we confuse them for the terrain. We confuse understanding for truth. Philosopher Alan Watts called this the menu problem. You go to a restaurant, open the menu, and try to eat the pictures. The description says steak, but the steak itself has weight, smell, taste. Dimensions that language cannot hold. And yet we live our lives chewing on menus, believing they're meals. Even memory is filtered through meaning. You don't remember events as they happened. You remember how they made you feel. You remember the story you assigned to them. And when your beliefs change, your memories often change with them. This is how two people can walk away from the same moment with opposite truths. Now layer in ideology. Whether it's politics, religion, or personal trauma, the meanings we assign to the world begin to form filters, unconscious lenses that dictate what we notice and what we ignore. Psychologists call this confirmation bias. We seek out information that matches our beliefs and reject what contradicts them. Dot in this way, meaning becomes a cage. We stop seeing people. We see categories. We stop hearing nuance. We hear echo chambers. We stop exploring the unknown. We reduce it to something we've already named. Reality shrinks to fit our story. Dot. And here's the paradox. Meaning is useful. It helps you survive. It tells you what matters, what to avoid, what to love, what to fear, but it also becomes invisible. You forget that meaning is something you add, not something the world contains on its own. It's like wearing tinted glasses for so long, you forget what unfiltered light looks like. In meditation, many practitioners experience moments where meaning drops away. The world is still there. Sights, sounds, sensations, but stripped of interpretation. A bird sings and it's not beautiful or annoying. It just is. A tree sways and it's not alive or dead. It simply moves. And in that moment, many report something uncanny. The world becomes clearer, more vivid, more real, because it's no longer being explained. Meaning, in its attempt to define reality, had been hiding it all along. Even modern physics stumbles into this paradox. Quantum mechanics doesn't offer clear, comforting narratives. It offers math, probabilities, uncertainty. The moment we try to say, this is what it means, we lose the thing itself. The math works. The stories fail because maybe reality isn't a story. Maybe it's a field of infinite experience, crushed and narrowed every time we insist on understanding it. So what happens when you let go of meaning? What happens when you stop labeling? Every thought, every feeling, every person you meet, at first it's terrifying, like floating without a compass. But then something shifts. You see more, you judge less, you breathe, you stop asking what the moment means and begin to experience what it is. Meaning hides. Reality is not an invitation to nihilism. It's a reminder that your explanations, however comforting, are not the world itself. They're shadows, interpretations, paintings of a landscape you haven't fully seen. And maybe, just maybe, if you want to touch truth, you have to stop explaining it. You were so sure. You read it. You saw the documentary. You checked the numbers. It was a fact, confirmed, cited, absolute. And then something changed. New evidence appeared. Or a study got debunked, or the scientific consensus shifted again. Suddenly, that fact you're sure of, it's gone. Or worse, it was never true to begin with. Welcome to Fact That Shifts, a paradox that reveals the slipperiness of certainty, the fragility of knowledge, and the unsettling possibility that what we call truth may be a moving target. Always just a few steps ahead of our understanding. Let's start with science. The institution most associated with objective facts. In the 1600s, it was a fact that the sun revolved around the earth, backed by observation, backed by religion, backed by common sense. Anyone who said otherwise risked excommunication, or worse. Then came Copernicus, then Galileo, then Kepler. The fact reversed. In the 1800s, doctors believed in miasma theory, that bad smells caused disease. It made sense. Plague always followed foul odors. Then along came germ theory. Then microscopes. Suddenly the real culprits were invisible, floating, biological. The old fact was not just wrong. It was deadly. In the 20th century, ulcers were thought to be caused by stress or spicy food. Then two Australian scientists, Barry Marshall and Robin Warren, discovered a bacterium, H. pylori, that actually caused them. When they published this new fact, they were mocked, dismissed. One of them had to drink the bacteria himself to prove the point. Now it's medical consensus. So, here's the pattern. Facts aren't fixed. They're provisional, they're scaffolded. We build towers of belief on them, but the ground beneath them shifts, slowly, relentlessly, and sometimes violently. Even mathematics, the supposed bastion of certainty, is vulnerable. Enter Giggles. Incompleteness theorems, two of the most mind-breaking ideas ever put to paper. In the 1930s, Kurt Gödel proved that within any consistent mathematical system complex enough to contain arithmetic, there are true statements that can't be proven within the system. Not because they're wrong, but because the system itself is incomplete. In simpler terms, there are facts that exist but we can't access them from within the framework we're using. Truths outside the reach of logic. Think about that. Even in the most precise, abstract space humans have ever invented, truth still slips through the cracks. Now jump to quantum mechanics, where facts get even slipperier. The position of a particle, not a fact until measured. Its spin, defined only relative to the observer. In some interpretations, a particle doesn't have any properties until they're observed. It exists in a cloud of probabilities. The moment you try to pin it down, it changes. That's not a metaphor. That's physics. Fact shifts the moment you look at it. This bleeds into psychology too. Memory, which we rely on as a repository of personal facts, is astonishingly unreliable. Every time you recall a memory, you alter it. Your current emotional state bleeds into the reconstruction. New information rewrites old perceptions. What you remember may be a Frankenstein, stitched together from fragments, guesses, and whatever made the most narrative sense at the time. You remember a fact. And over time, it becomes fiction. Even perception is fact flexible. Consider optical illusions, like the famous dress that appeared blue and black to some, white and gold to others. Same photons, same screen, different brains. The fact of its color changed based on internal variables, expectations, assumptions, lighting context. You don't just see facts. You construct them. And that's the paradox. We cling to facts for stability. We need them to anchor meaning, build systems, form trust. But the closer you look, the more facts resemble approximations, snapshots of a constantly evolving field of understanding. This doesn't mean all facts are lies. It means they are contextual, layered, contingent on the instruments we use, the language we apply, the frameworks we believe in. And here's the existential twist. If facts shift, then what about the self built on those facts? Your identity, your beliefs, your ethics. If they all rest on things you once knew to be true, and those things change, what remains? Maybe nothing fixed. Maybe the self is just another fact in flux. So now the question becomes, how do you live in a world where the ground won't stop moving? Some retreat into dogma, locking onto facts like lifeboats. Others drown in relativism, believing nothing is true, so why bother? But there is a third way. Curiosity. Accepting that facts are not final, but living. That knowledge is a process, not a destination. That what you believe today should be held with both confidence and humility, ready to be rebuilt if the foundations shift. Fact that shifts isn't about giving up on truth. It's about learning to dance with it, to move as it moves, to hold on just tight enough to stand, but loose enough to let go, because the real paradox isn't that facts change. It's that they were never still to begin with. You remember your childhood bedroom, the way the light came through the window, the color of the walls, maybe even the creak of the floorboards or the smell of the old furniture. It feels clear, vivid. But now ask yourself, are you remembering the room, or are you remembering the last time you imagined it? Welcome to Vision Shapes Memory, a paradox that warps the timeline of experience. It suggests that what you see now, today, or even yesterday doesn't just alter how you perceive the present. It loops backward. It rewrites your past. Let's begin with the fragile tool you rely on most, memory. Neuroscience has proven that memory is not a storage system. It's not a vault or a tape recorder. It's a reconstruction machine. Every time you remember something, you rebuild it. Not from perfect files, but from fragments, guesses, emotional echoes, and crucially, current context. In one landmark study, researchers showed participants doctored photographs of events that never happened, like a childhood hot air balloon ride. After seeing the image, many participants not only believed it had occurred, they began adding elaborate details. Who was there, what the air smelled like, how it felt. They weren't lying. They were seeing something, And that vision created the memory dot, another experiment by Elizabeth Loftus showed that simply describing a non-existent event using vivid sensory language could implant it into memory. Not just a vague feeling, a full, emotionally charged experience. The mind, once shown a scene or offered a vivid narrative, fills in the rest and stores it as if it had always been there. Your vision, both literal and mental, reshapes the archive of your life. But it gets stranger. In 2010, researchers discovered something unsettling in the hippocampus, the brain's memory center. When participants were asked to imagine a future event, the same brain regions lit up as when they remembered a past one. Your brain does not differentiate cleanly between what was and what could be. Memory and imagination share a neurological architecture, and this means one terrifying thing. If you vividly imagine something enough times, it can become indistinguishable from memory. You can accidentally believe you lived what you only pictured. Even movies and photos, things you didn't imagine but saw with your eyes, get pulled into this loop. Ever remembered a moment with a loved one, only to later realize your memory was actually a photo? The brain stores the visual, not the moment. And sometimes it replaces the original completely. Vision overwrites experience. It gets even darker in trauma. Victims of abuse sometimes report recovered memories, long buried scenes that return suddenly, usually triggered by a sound, smell, or story. But studies show that these memories can be shaped or even created by visual cues. Therapy sessions, news coverage, stories from others. Once you see it, especially if it's vivid and emotional, the brain might accept it as a recollection, but it works in reverse. 2. People with PTSD can have real memories that get distorted or erased by what they wish they'd seen instead. A person freezes instead of fighting and later imagines themselves being strong. Over time, that image replaces the truth. Or the opposite. A survivor remembers more blood, more horror, more screams than were actually there because the brain visually exaggerates what the body cannot bear. And it's not just trauma. It's everyday life. Think of it, déjà vu. You see a scene, a hallway, a face, a sunrise, and your brain suddenly insists, I've been here before. But you haven't? What's happening is a glitch in your recognition system. A visual trigger misfires, and the present becomes tangled with imagined memory. Vision becomes proof. Memory bends to match it. So here's the paradox. You think your memories shape how you see the world. But in reality, it's how you see the world that shapes what you remember about it. And once that loop starts, it never ends. You meet someone. For the second time, you already have an impression, a story, a label, a face. That vision reshapes what you remember from the first encounter. You remember them being colder or kinder or more forgettable than they actually were. The memory conforms to the image. The story you carry becomes the story you believe. And then that memory shapes how you react next time, which shapes what they do, which gives you more to remember. And so on. Vision, memory, behavior, reality, all braided together in a loop that has no clear beginning. So what do you trust? The camera, the eye, the mind? None are neutral. None are immune to influence. Even knowing this paradox doesn't free you from it, because you can't unsee what you've seen. And once you've seen it, you can't help but remember it. And once you remember it, you're already someone new. Vision shapes memory. Isn't just about perception. It's about identity, because if your memories are shaped by how you see, and how you see is shaped by what you believe, then who you are might just be a reflection of what you've allowed yourself to look at. And maybe the scariest question isn't, what have I seen? But rather, what have I never looked at? Because I didn't want to remember it? You pick up a rock. It's cold, rough, dumb, just matter. It doesn't feel, it doesn't think, it just exists. You toss it aside, confident in your place at the top of the chain. The conscious observer, the thinker, the self-aware mind. But what if that hierarchy is an illusion? What if the rock, or the table, or the air around you isn't as passive as it seems? What if matter thinks back? This paradox challenges the deepest assumption of modern science, that consciousness emerges from complexity, and that until a certain threshold is crossed, matter is just dead stuff. But more and more, the lines between matter and mind are blurring, and the idea that only humans, or even only brains, can think may be a comforting fiction. Let's begin with the fringe. A philosophical idea once dismissed as laughable, panpsychism. It proposes that consciousness, or at least the building blocks of consciousness, are fundamental properties of matter. That even a single electron might have some form of proto-experience. Not thoughts, not emotions, but a kind of awareness, a responsiveness baked into the core of being. Before you roll your eyes, remember, panpsychism isn't New Age fluff. Philosophers like Galen Strawson and physicists like Roger Penrose have seriously entertained it. Not because they want magic, but because mainstream materialism keeps hitting a wall. That wall is called the hard problem of consciousness. It goes like this. Science can explain how neurons fire, how signals travel, how inputs lead to outputs. But it can't explain why those processes feel like anything. Why should the firing of neurons in your visual cortex result in the subjective experience of red? Why should chemical patterns give rise to awareness? There's no clear answer. No bridge from physical stuff to inner experience. So some thinkers flip the script. Maybe it's not that consciousness emerges from matter. Maybe matter was never unconscious to begin with. That's where this paradox lives. In the possibility that the stuff you're made of and the stuff you touch has been part of the story of awareness all along. Even biology starts to crack that. In 2021, researchers grew a cluster of human brain cells in a petri dish and taught it to play Pong. Not a joke. The cell cluster, dubbed a mini brain, learned to anticipate the ball's trajectory and move a paddle accordingly. There was no body, no nervous system, just a lump of matter, adapting, predicting, playing. The researchers didn't call it consciousness, but they couldn't call it non-consciousness either. And in plants, we've long treated them like decorations, silent, inert. But recent studies show plants can remember, communicate, and adapt to patterns. Some Venus. Fly traps can count touches to avoid wasting energy. Trees signal distress to one another through underground fungal networks. The so-called Wood Wide Web. Is it thought? No, but is it nothing? Also, no. It's a form of feedback intelligence, a behavior loop encoded in matter. Now zoom down. To the microscale. In quantum mechanics, particles behave differently when observed. Their state collapses, their paths change, as if, and this is where the philosophers enter, the particle is somehow aware of its environment. It's not thinking in the human sense, but it's reacting to context, to attention. And this leads to one of the oldest, weirdest ideas in consciousness studies. Maybe awareness is relational, not something that belongs only to humans, but something that emerges in interaction. When one system touches another, when information flows, when feedback loops happen. In that view, your brain isn't conscious in isolation. It's conscious because it's constantly interacting with itself, with the body, with the environment. Take away the feedback and the lights go out. But what if that principle applies to matter too? What if every atom, every molecule, every object is part of a network of responsiveness? And what we call consciousness is just the echo of that web humming at the right frequency. Now step into speculative neuroscience. Some theories suggest that consciousness isn't confined to neurons, but may exist throughout the body, in the gut, the heart, the immune system. Some cells seem to decide in complex ways, not because of centralized control, but because of localized intelligence, pattern recognition, prediction, adaptation. Just like matter, just like molecules, just like everything else. So here's the haunting thought. You're made of matter. You're made of carbon, calcium, water, and iron, elements forged in stars. And somehow that dust thinks. That dust worries. that dust dreams about itself. Dot. So what if matter doesn't just allow thinking? What if it was thinking all along? Not human thought, not language, not self-awareness in the mirror, but a slow, patient, nonverbal kind of intelligence, a silent knowing, a waiting. Matter thinks back doesn't mean your coffee mug is plotting revenge. It means the boundary between mind and material might be thinner than you think. It means that when you look at the world, you're not looking at an object, you're looking at a conversation partner, one that just happens to speak in atoms instead of words. And the scariest part, if matter can think, then you're not special. You're not separate. You're just another ripple in a long ancient thought. One the universe started thinking long before you arrived. You stare into a mirror, your eyes lock with your own. You blink, and it blinks. You lift a hand, and it lifts. But somewhere inside, a quiet question stirs. Who's watching who? You are the observer, but also the observed. This is object sees itself, a paradox that emerges when the thing doing the seeing becomes the thing being seen. A feedback loop where the subject turns into the object, and the boundary between observer and observed collapses, like a house of mirrors with no exit. Let's begin where it all begins. Consciousness. Most theories of consciousness assume a structure, a division. There's a self, the thing experiencing, and then there's everything else, the things being experienced. But self-awareness violates this clean line. Because when you think about yourself, you become the object of your own attention. The observer turns inward. The spotlight shines on the bulb itself. Try it. Think of your own mind, not your thoughts, your awareness of thinking. That eerie sensation of watching yourself think. Of hearing your own inner voice say, I am me. What is that? Who is speaking? Who is listening? It's not two people. It's not a duality. It's a strange singularity that folds back onto itself. A loop. A knot in perception. And it's everywhere. In neuroscience. The mirror test is often used to assess self-awareness in animals. Chimps, dolphins, elephants, they pass it. They recognize that the image in the mirror is not another creature, but themselves. But what does that really mean? It means the brain has created a model of itself. It doesn't just process the world. It includes a model of its own processing. It watches itself watch. A mind within a mind. But here's the twist. Once that recursive loop begins, it never ends. The self that watches the self becomes watched by another layer of the self. And so on infinitely. This is called a strange loop, a concept developed by Douglas Hofstadter. It describes systems that loop back onto themselves in ways that blur the distinction between levels. Like the Escher drawing of a hand drawing itself. The creator becomes the created. The map includes the map maker. The object contains its own observer and your mind. It's the strangest loop of all, but it's not just philosophy in physics. The observer effect in quantum mechanics tells us that particles behave differently when measured. Observation changes outcome, but who's doing the observing? What counts as a measurement? If a system contains its own observer, like a brain, like a conscious entity, then is it collapsing its own wave function from the inside? Can a system measure itself? Mathematically, this leads to incompleteness. In Gödel's theorems, a system cannot fully describe itself without contradiction. It can model everything else, but not itself entirely. The moment it tries, it runs into paradox. Just like you. You can describe your memories, your behaviors, your emotions, but the core experience, the thing that's doing the describing, always slips away. Try to catch it, and it moves. Try to explain it, and it turns into another thought. Another layer of object. And yet, you feel it. You are so aware. Do we go with this into feedback? Into recursion? Into the moment when a camera films itself? When a microphone loops into its own speaker? When a person becomes aware of an awareness, and something eerie begins to unfold? This loop isn't stable. It distorts. This is why in some mental health conditions like depersonalization or existential OCD, the loop of self-observation becomes pathological. The person becomes too aware. They monitor every thought, every breath, every moment, until the I feels disconnected, unreal, hollow. The self collapses under the weight of its own gaze. The mind has become a hall of mirrors and can't find the door out. But in meditation and certain spiritual practices, the same loop is used for transcendence. Practitioners are trained to observe the observer again and again until the sense of a separate self dissolves entirely. There's still awareness. But no, just the loop. Just the process dot. So here's the paradox in full. You are the subject of your life. But the moment you try to define yourself, you turn into an object, something to be observed, labeled, understood. And in doing so, the subject slips away. You try to know yourself, and the thing doing the knowing becomes unknowable. The object sees itself, and what it sees is watching. This isn't the glitch. This is the nature of self-awareness, and it raises terrifying questions. Can a system truly understand itself? Can consciousness ever fully know its source? Can you ever see the seer? Or are you destined to orbit your own mind forever, a satellite, with no center, circling a mystery that is you, but also not quite you? Object sees itself is the paradox that sits at the root of every question you've ever asked about identity, truth, and thought. Because when the eye turns inward, it finds another eye, and another, not another, not a mirror, but an echo of something watching that may never be seen. You think you're here now, reading this, breathing, sitting in this very moment. But what if that now you're living in isn't as real time as it feels? What if the present is just a reflection, a reconstruction, a mirror of the past, not the moment itself? Welcome to Now Mirrors Then, a paradox that suggests the now you're experiencing is not truly present, but a ghost of what just happened. That your brain, your perception, and even your consciousness are living in the past while pretending to exist in real time. Let's begin in neuroscience, where time starts to melt almost immediately. Every sensation you experience, sight, sound, touch, takes time to process. When light hits your retina, it takes milliseconds to become a signal. When sound hits your ear, it has to travel through air, then flesh, then synapse. Your brain doesn't experience events as they happen. It waits. It assembles. Scientists estimate that your conscious awareness lags up to half a second behind real events. But you don't notice the delay because your brain cleverly stitches together reality to appear seamless. It's the world's most convincing lag correction algorithm, and here's the catch: that seamless present. It's fake. It's a backdated illusion. The philosopher Daniel Dennett calls this the multiple drafts theory of consciousness. Your brain gathers fragments of input, edits them together, and only then creates the feeling of now. It's not a live broadcast. It's a slightly delayed highlight reel. Your now is always a little bit then, but it gets weirder in the flash lag effect. When a moving object and a flash occur at the same time, people perceive the flash as lagging behind, even though it wasn't. Why? Because the brain predicts the trajectory of the moving object, but not the flash. It's adjusting the timeline, cheating, to keep perception stable. In effect, the brain isn't showing you what's happening. It's showing you what it thinks already happened. And that's just vision. In memory science, it gets even more paradoxical. Your experience of now is often shaped by what you expect to happen based on the past. Your current perception is filtered through memory, which itself is a reconstruction. So the present becomes a distorted mirror of what has come before. You don't just experience now. You experience what your brain thinks now should be based on then. Take a moment of deja vu. You walk into a room you've never seen, and it feels uncannily familiar. For a brief second, the now feels like the then, but what actually happened? Researchers believe it's a timing glitch, a delay in the signal between different brain systems, causing your brain to register the present moment as something it has already experienced. Now becomes memory, instantly. In a stranger example, PTSD patients often relive past trauma in full sensory detail. A loud noise in the present can trigger a memory so vivid that the brain can't distinguish it from reality. The now is hijacked by the then. The timeline collapses. But even in ordinary life, your present is haunted by your past. When you meet someone new, you bring old stories with you, expectations, projections, templates from childhood, from heartbreak, from movies. You're not seeing them clearly. You're seeing them through a mirror smeared with Ben. The past shapes perception, not passively, but actively. It filters your choices. It colors your attention. It determines what you even notice in the first place. This is how confirmation bias works. You believe someone is untrustworthy, and then every action they take becomes evidence, even if they're being kind. You're not in the now, you're in the then. And the then is wearing a mask called now. And if you think this is just psychology, physics has something to say. 2. In the block universe model, a view supported by relativity. Time is not a flowing river, but a frozen dimension. Past, present, and future all coexist. Your feeling of moving through time is just a feature of how your brain experiences slices of that block. What you call now is just a slice you're currently lit up in. But it's not special. It's not the only now. All nows exist. And yet you only see one. And here's where the paradox bites. If every moment is just a reconstruction, and every reconstruction is built from what came before, then your present isn't real in the way you think. It's a mirror, not a window, not a stage, but a reflection shaped, warped, echoed by your past. So ask yourself, what part of your now is actually memory in disguise? What belief, what fear, what expectation from your past is shaping this very second? And then ask something harder. Is it possible to ever experience now, unfiltered? Can you drop the memory, the prediction, the commentary, and just see? Or will it then always creep in? Will the mirror always distort? Now mirrors then isn't just a trick of the brain. It's the fundamental trap of consciousness. You live in a loop of reflection, a present colored by the shadows of the past, and maybe, just maybe, there never was a now. Only echoes, only approximations, only the dream of presence, refracted through time. You hear the news. Something happened. A decision was made. A law passed. A person spoke. A message sent. But before you finish reading, before your brain finishes decoding the words, you've already made up your mind. You feel something. Anger, relief, fear, pride, and then only afterward, you gather the reasons to justify it. This is feeling before fact, a paradox that flips the expected order of understanding. You believe you form feelings based on facts that you analyze and then react. But in truth, it often happens the other way around. The emotion comes first, and the fact is whatever helps explain it. Let's start with neuroscience. When your brain receives sensory information, it doesn't go straight to the logical centers. It passes through the amygdala first, the brain's emotional alarm system. This means you feel before you think. Your limbic system tags input with emotion before the prefrontal cortex has a chance to interpret. That flash of anxiety when your phone buzzes, that gut-tightening reaction to a headline, that instant dislike of a stranger's face, those are emotional judgments formed in milliseconds, long before your rational mind gets the chance to weigh in. And once the feeling is there, your mind rushes in to build a narrative that justifies it. This is called motivated reasoning. You're not looking for the truth. You're looking for an explanation that fits how you already feel. And the stronger the emotion, the harder your brain works to justify it, not because you're dishonest, but because that's how the system is built. The feeling filters the fact got in one experiment. Participants were asked to evaluate fake studies that either confirmed or contradicted their political beliefs. Those who felt threatened by the opposing side were more likely to discredit the evidence, no matter how solid it was. The feeling of discomfort overrode the facts. And the scariest part, they didn't realize they were doing it. They thought they were being logical. They weren't lying. They were rewriting reality to match the emotion dot in psychology. This is known as the affect heuristic, the mental shortcut where feelings guide judgment. If something feels good, it must be safe. If something feels bad, it must be wrong. Even before you understand it, but it doesn't stop with politics. It's in everything. Food, music, art, relationships. You don't analyze a song and then decide how to feel about it. You feel something, then decide why it's brilliant or terrible. You don't read a stranger's resume and then feel trust. You feel trust or distrust, then find reasons to support it. Your brain runs on vibes. The facts just show up after dot. This even happens in memory. Research has shown that people will alter their recollection of events to match how they feel about them now. A breakup that was once amicable becomes toxic. A teacher you admired becomes weird. A childhood moment turns from happy to haunting. Not because of facts, but because your current feelings reached backward and rewrote the meaning. Now consider the implications. If feelings come first, then every conversation, every disagreement, every worldview you hold may be shaped less by truth and more by emotionally charged assumptions. And once a feeling is in place, it becomes incredibly hard to unseat. This is why facts don't change minds. Because minds are built on feelings, and feelings don't bow to evidence, but it gets even deeper in embodied cognition, a theory in psychology. It's argued that our physical states, posture, breathing, facial expression can generate feelings, which then shape thoughts. Stand tall, breathe deep, smile, and your brain will interpret your situation more positively. Not because anything changed, but because the feeling changed first. And in some therapies, like internal family systems or somatic experiencing, the process begins not with thinking through a problem, but with feeling into it. Because the truth of an experience often lives in the body before it can be spoken. So what's the paradox? You believe that facts shape reality, but your feeling about reality often shapes what counts as fact. You believe you are rational, but your rationality is a servant to emotion, dressing up instincts in the costume of logic. You feel something. Then you find the fact that fits, and even when the fact doesn't fit, you bend it until it does, or you discard it altogether. Feeling. Before fact isn't a flaw in human cognition, it's a feature, a shortcut for survival, a fast-track decision system from your evolutionary past. But in a world of endless information and infinite complexity, it becomes a trap. So now ask yourself, how many of your beliefs are emotional armor? How many of your opinions are just feelings that found good PR? And most of all, can you ever truly know something before you felt it? Maybe not. Maybe every fact you've ever clung to was just a reflection of something felt long before you ever saw it. And maybe the only way to see clearly is to feel your way into the dark before deciding what's really there. You're sitting alone, no one's watching, no one's talking. Nothing dramatic is happening. And yet, you shift in your chair. You glance at the door, you suddenly feel observed, or maybe you get an idea, a feeling, a reaction you can't trace. Something moved you, but nothing's there. Welcome to unseen. Moves known. A paradox that explores how the invisible can steer the visible, how the things you cannot perceive still shape what you do, and how your life might be guided by forces you never directly encounter. Let's start in the lab. In a series of now famous experiments in behavioral psychology. Researchers found that participants primed with certain words, even without realizing it, changed their behavior. In one experiment, people who read words associated with old age, like retired, Florida, wrinkle, walked slower down the hallway afterward. Another group, primed with words related to aggression, behaved more irritably. They weren't aware of it. They didn't choose it. But the unseen language shaped their motion. Nothing was told to them. And yet, they got now enter the world of blind sight, a condition in which people who are cortically blind due to damage in the visual cortex, can still respond to visual stimuli they don't consciously see. Ask them where an object is, and they say they don't know. But ask them to point, and their hand goes right to it. They're being moved by a signal they can't access. The unseen moves the known. And it doesn't stop there. In split brain patients, where the connection between brain hemispheres is severed, we discover that information given to one side of the brain can trigger an action, and the other side, unaware of the input, will invent a reason for the behavior. Example, flash the word laugh to the right hemisphere. The left hemisphere, the one responsible for speech, doesn't see the word. But when asked why they're laughing, the person says, "You guys are funny." They don't know why they laughed. So they make up a reason. They were moved by something unseen, and the conscious mind retrofits the story. This is the unsettling truth of most human behavior. You act, and then explain. You feel, and then invent meaning. And half the time, you never know what really started the motion. Even in neuroscience, your decisions are influenced by signals long before you're aware of them. In readiness potential studies, brain scans can predict your choice to press a button up to 7 to 10 seconds. Before you become conscious of that choice, your action is already in motion. You're just catching up. Now turn to social reality. You walk into a room, no one says a word, but you feel tension. You pick up on body language, micro expressions, postures. You adjust your behavior, maybe speak softer, avoid eye contact, change your seat. You don't consciously process all of this, but your behavior changes. The unseen context shapes the known response. Marketing works this way too. Companies use color psychology, ambient music, scent diffusion, all imperceptible on the surface, to change your behavior. You feel more relaxed, more impulsive, more curious, and you don't know why your purchases are being guided by forces that don't show themselves. Even in memory, unseen elements guide your mind. In experiments, when people are asked to recall a list of related words, say bed, bellow, dream, night, they almost always remember the word sleep, even if it wasn't on the list. Why? Because unseen semantic patterns move memory. Your brain fills in gaps based on invisible associations. You don't remember reality. You remember meaning, and that meaning often came from something you didn't even notice. In physics too. The unseen holds power. The majority of the universe is made up of dark matter and dark energy. Invisible, undetectable forces that shape the movement of galaxies, stars, entire cosmic systems. We know they're there because of what they do. Because of how they move things. We can't see them, but we see the trace. The motion. In quantum mechanics, a particle's behavior is affected by things it could have encountered but didn't. A phenomenon called counterfactual measurement. The outcome is shaped not just by what happened, but by what could have happened. Even potential becomes force. Even what didn't occur leaves fingerprints. So what's the paradox? We live in a world obsessed with clarity, with seeing, knowing, proving, and yet the majority of what moves us is invisible. The idea you didn't know you absorbed. The memory that shaped your fear. The social rule no one taught you, but you still obey. The neuron that fired before you ever chose. The gravity that pulls without form. The data that never reached your awareness, but redirected your life. You are not just reacting to what's in front of you. You are being steered by a field of ghosts, invisible causes, silent guides, and your conscious mind, bless it, tries its best to take credit, to name, to narrate, to make it feel like you're in charge. But you're not the pilot. You're the narrator. And half the story was written in incul. Never see. Unseen moves known isn't just a weird glitch in behavior. It's the architecture of experience. It's the truth that the loudest forces are often the quietest. So the next time you feel certain about a choice, a thought, belief, ask not just what moved you, but what moved that. Because behind every visible act is a shadow. And sometimes the shadow is steering the hand. You tap a domino and the whole row falls, clear, mechanical, one piece hits another, energy transfers, and the motion spreads. This is how we're taught the world works. Contact equals cause. If something happens, it's because something else touched it, pushed it, triggered it. But what if things can be moved without being touched? What if the universe allows for effects without contact, actions without transmission, causality without proximity? This is cause without contact, a paradox that breaks the backbone of classical physics, challenges the foundations of perception, and forces us to accept that some things are connected without ever physically touching. Let's start with the experiment that shattered centuries of logic. Quantum entanglement. In 1935. Einstein, Podolsky, and Rosen published a paper arguing that quantum mechanics must be incomplete. They called attention to a bizarre prediction of the theory that two particles could become entangled, meaning their properties would be perfectly linked no matter how far apart they were. Measure one particle's spin here, and you instantly know the spin of the other one. Over there, Einstein mocked it. He called it spooky action at a distance. It violated his sense of local realism, the idea that objects are only influenced by their immediate surroundings. But decades later, we tested it. In 1964, physicist John Bell formulated a theorem showing how entangled particles would behave differently than any local hidden variable theory could explain. In experiment after experiment, from Young aspect, in the 1980s to modern quantum labs using satellites in space, the results held. Entangled particles really do affect each other instantly, even when separated by vast distances. No signal passes between them. No force is exchanged. But the effect is real. One particle knows what happens to the other and adjusts instantly, because without contact, and here's the kicker, it's not optional. This isn't a strange side theory. It's how the universe actually behaves. Quantum entanglement is now a key component in emerging technologies, like quantum encryption and quantum computing. The paradox is real, and it works. Now expand this idea beyond physics. In biology, researchers have documented cases where separate cells, placed in different parts of a medium, begin to synchronize behavior, releasing chemicals or shifting energy without any direct communication or chemical contact. These effects often defy simple biochemical explanation. Some call it resonance, some call it field coherence. But the pattern remains. Action happens without touch. In human psychology, studies have shown that when people sit together in silence, especially close friends, twins, or longtime couples, their heart rates and brainwaves can synchronize, even without speaking, even without seeing each other. It's called physiological synchrony, and it suggests that bodies can become attuned in ways that don't rely on visible cues. You walk into a room and feel something. The mood, the tension, the energy. No one said anything. No one did anything. But you were affected. The atmosphere changed you. And no one touched you. Even in emotion, this paradox appears. Empathy often functions through mirror neurons, systems in your brain that activate when you observe someone else doing or feeling something. When you see someone cry, your own brain partially activates as if you were crying. No words. Number. Logic. No contact. Just seeing is enough to create a mirrored experience inside you. But here's where the paradox grows teeth. In a Newtonian worldview, contact is everything. Forces act locally. A causes B because A pushed B. That's how we make sense of reality. But once cause can travel without touch, the whole system collapses. It opens the door to a universe that is deeply connected beneath the surface, in ways we can't see. This is why some physicists and philosophers suggest that the universe may be fundamentally non-local, that space and time are not the real fabric of reality, but emergent properties. What's underneath? Pure relation, pure connection, a hidden network where everything is already in contact, even when it appears isolated, like a spider web stretched across dimensions. Pluck one thread, and the tremor is felt across the whole structure. This might sound mystical, but it's increasingly mathematical. Even string theory and holographic models of the universe suggest that information might not be stored in individual locations, but in the relations between things, the interference patterns, the entanglements, the invisible connections. So here's the paradox. You believe the world is made of things, but maybe it's made of links. You believe that what isn't touching you can't change you, but maybe everything has been touching you all along, just not in space. And if that's true, then every moment of your life might be shaped by forces you'll never see. Every choice might echo across realities. Every breath might resonate through a web too vast for your eyes, because without contact isn't a fairy tale. It's a scientific fact that sounds like magic. It's the whisper behind the noise. It's the reason you sometimes change without knowing why. And it's the reminder that nothing is truly separate. Not you. Not now. Not anything. You've built a world in your head. A logical one. A world where things make sense. Where causes lead to effects. Where A plus B equals C. You rely on logic to guide your beliefs, your decisions, your understanding of the universe. And then reality with a crooked grin pulls out the rug. Because sometimes, no matter how airtight your reasoning, reality refuses to cooperate. This is the paradox of reality. Mocks logic, the haunting truth that what's real doesn't always line up with what's rational. That the universe doesn't owe you coherence. That truth may not fit inside the lines drawn by human minds. Let's begin with the twin monsters of modern physics, quantum mechanics and relativity. Individually, both are brilliant, tested, confirmed, predictive. Quantum mechanics governs the very small, particles, atoms, subatomic events. Relativity governs the very large, space, time, gravity. But try to combine them. Try to describe a black hole's singularity using quantum logic. It breaks. The math collapses. Infinity sneaks in. Logic hits a wall. Reality doesn't care. And yet, the black hole still exists. It devours stars. It bends light. It warps time. We can see its effects. We can feel its pull. It's real. But illogical. Now turn to quantum experiments like a double slit test. When particles are fired one by one through two slits, they create an interference pattern, as if each particle goes through both slits simultaneously. But if you measure which slit it goes through, the interference disappears. It behaves like a particle again. The outcome depends on whether you look. This breaks logic. A thing is either here or there. It can't be both. It either goes left or right. It can't decide based on your attention. But that's what happens. And the more you try to explain it, the deeper the madness goes. Because every interpretation introduces its own absurdities. Infinite universes, conscious observers collapsing probabilities, or reality not even existing until you ask. That's not logic. That's theater. But it gets worse. In mathematics. Gödel's incompleteness theorem says that in any logical system complex enough to describe arithmetic, there will be true statements that cannot be proven. Logic hits a wall. Truth escapes the net. That means some things are true, but you'll never know why. And even if you build a bigger, stronger system, the paradox survives. It just moves further out. Even in probability theory, we get mockery. Take the Monty Hall problem. The game show dilemma where switching doors actually increases your odds of winning, even though your gut tells you otherwise. People fail to believe the math, not because they're rational, but because logic doesn't feel intuitive. And in real life, reality constantly trolls our expectations. People don't act logically. Evolution doesn't progress logically. Emotions override evidence. Belief trumps fact. Systems collapse for reasons no one predicts. You plan carefully and still get blindsided. And yet, even when logic fails, we cling to it. We crave patterns. We invent reasons. We smooth out contradictions and call it truth. This is called cognitive closure, the psychological need for certainty. We'd rather be wrong and confident than lost in ambiguity. So we bend reality to fit logic, even when reality is laughing in our face. And here's where the paradox sharpens. We use logic to build bridges, invent medicine, land robots on Mars. But we also use logic to justify cruelty, to defend absurd ideologies, to argue that only what's rational can be real. Meanwhile, reality doesn't follow your script. It doesn't respect syllogisms or if-then statements. It operates on rules that shift when you zoom in. It obeys patterns that break when you observe them. It mocks your categories. It laughs at your limits. Even in dreams, the brain accepts impossible logic. People morph into other people. Time loops back. Gravity turns sideways, and it feels normal. Until you wake up. Maybe the waking world isn't so different. Maybe logic is a lens, useful, sharp, often reliable, but still a lens. And when you forget it's a lens, you start mistaking the map for the territory. Here's the real twist. Sometimes logic is the problem. Sometimes the truth isn't what's most reasonable. It's what actually happens, even when it's unreasonable. Reality doesn't need your permission to be confusing. It just is dots. So now ask yourself, are you trying to understand the world? Or are you trying to make it comfortable? Are you looking for truth? Or just for something that makes sense? Because making sense is often just the ego doing PR, and maybe the only way to catch reality is to stop expecting it to behave. Reality mocks logic is the reminder that the universe isn't a courtroom. It's not a philosophy paper. It's not even a science book. It's a chaotic dance of patterns and paradoxes, riddles and reactions, noise and glimpses of meaning. And if you insist it follow your rules, you'll miss the point entirely. You're told laws govern everything: gravity, thermodynamics, cause and effect. These laws are constants, immutable, unchanged by opinion. Water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. Objects fall at 9.8 meters per second squared. The universe doesn't care what you think. But what if it does? What if your beliefs, those fragile, shifting inner states, could bend the very rules you live under? Not just socially, not metaphorically, but biologically, physically, scientifically. This is the paradox of belief. Alters law, the unsettling idea that reality isn't entirely independent of you, and that the more you believe something to be true, the more it becomes true. Let's begin with a familiar mystery, the placebo effect. A person takes a sugar pill, believing it's a painkiller, and the pain vanishes. The brain responds as if a real drug was administered, releasing dopamine, endorphins, even reducing inflammation. Fake medicine becomes real treatment, powered by belief. In Parkinson's patients, placebo injections of saline have caused surges in dopamine release, visibly improving motor function. In surgical studies, patients who received sham surgeries where doctors made incisions but did nothing improved, just as much as those who underwent the real procedure. The belief didn't just trick the mind. It rewrote the body. It bent the rules of physiology. Now meet the placebo's darker twin, the nocebo effect. Tell someone they've been exposed to a virus, even if they haven't, and they may develop fever, fatigue, nausea. Tell them a harmless food will make them sick, and their body agrees. In some cases, patients have died from overdoses of sugar pills they believe were real drugs. Their belief changed the outcome. Their expectation became biology. That's not mind over matter. That's mind becoming matter. And it doesn't stop at illness. In a 2007 study, hotel maids who were told that their daily work counted as exercise without changing anything, they did, lost more weight and showed improved health markers compared to a control group. They didn't move more. They just believed what they were doing was exercise. Their body changed. The law of cause and effect rewrote itself under belief. Now step into quantum mechanics, where things get stranger. In observer-dependent experiments, like the delayed choice quantum eraser, particles behave differently depending on whether they are being measured. Even when the decision to observe happens after the particle has already acted. It's as if the universe is waiting to be told how to behave. as if context determines outcome, and belief in the form of measurement, intention, expectation influences reality at the fundamental level. Some interpretations go even further. The participatory universe model, proposed by physicist John Wheeler, suggests that observers create reality just by observing it. That belief, consciousness, and observation are woven into the structure of the cosmos. Not because it's spiritual. Because the math requires it. Now shift to psychology. Ever heard of the Pygmalion effect? It's a phenomenon where higher expectations lead to better performance, simply because someone believes you're capable. In classrooms, students randomly labeled as high potential by researchers outperformed their peers. Even though they weren't more skilled, the teachers' belief changed how they taught. The students' belief changed how they learned, and performance rose. Belief altered law. Even in economic theory, expectations shape markets. If investors believe a crash is coming, even without evidence, their behavior causes the crash. Reality bends to belief. Bubbles inflate on sentiment. Value becomes vapor, then concrete again, all based on collective projection. Now ask yourself this. How many laws are just agreed upon beliefs? Social norms, moral codes, cultural rules. They feel rigid until someone stops believing. Then they crumble. Laws are only laws until belief vanishes. Then they're memories, but here's the scary part. Yourself operates the same way. In psychology, self-fulfilling prophecy is real. If you believe you're bad at something, you're less likely to try. You fail more often. Your brain starts filtering reality to confirm that belief, and that internal expectation becomes your law. But shift the belief, and the law shifts too. Not because you're lying to yourself. Because the feedback loop between belief and action rewires your brain, and the rules that govern your life evolve. So here's the paradox in full. We're told that belief follows truth. That we believe something because it's real, but what? If sometimes it's real because we believe it? Not always, not everywhere, but often enough to matter. Often enough to fracture the foundation. Belief alters law doesn't mean anything is true if you believe hard enough. It means that reality is interactive, that the world is not a monologue. It's a conversation, and belief is part of the grammar. And maybe, just maybe, the rules you live by aren't fixed. They're waiting for instruction. And sometimes, the universe asks, what do you expect me to do? You've been taught that mass implies motion, that weight, gravity, inertia are all signs of something moving. Reacting, resisting, you push a car and it pushes back. You lift a box and your muscles feel the resistance. Motion and mass go hand in hand. But what if something has mass and doesn't move? What if it just sits stubborn, silent, and still pulls the world toward it? This is the paradox of mass without motion, the riddle at the heart of what makes things real, and the haunting realization that something can weigh everything down without ever doing anything at all. Let's begin with the heaviest object. In the known universe, the black hole. A black hole, by definition, does not move, not in any traditional sense. It doesn't vibrate or rotate in space the way normal objects do, although some spin, and that's even worse. It doesn't emit light. It doesn't interact. It simply exists, a fixed point, a collapsed star, an absence. And yet, it warps the cosmos around it. Its gravity bends light. Its presence slows time. Its event horizon traps everything, including information. It has no surface, no sound, no spinning gears. But it has mass, enormous mass, and that mass moves. Everything else, it is motionless. But everything nearby dances in its field. It pulls, without pushing. It acts, without acting. Mass, without motion. Now step into the world of quantum mechanics, where the Higgs field lives, a mysterious, invisible energy field that exists everywhere in the universe. Particles, as they move through this field, acquire mass, not because the Higgs field hits them, not because it grabs them, but because it resists their motion. There's no impact, no collision. The field doesn't move, And yet, it gives weight to everything that exists. That's like walking through a room full of fog and suddenly just being in it makes you heavier. You can't see it. It doesn't react, but it changes what you are. Stillness becomes substance. And it's not just in physics, in psychology. There are emotional black holes, traumas, memories, experiences that sit inside us like unmoving mass. They don't jump out or shout. They don't have to. They're quiet. Present. They weigh on every thought, every relationship, every belief without moving. You avoid certain conversations. You walk differently through your life, not because something is actively attacking you, but because of what's silently sitting at your center. This is emotional mass without motion. In social systems. 2, there are institutions or ideologies that haven't changed in decades, but they shape everything around them. They pull culture, language, politics into their orbit, not because they're actively doing anything, but because their existence alone creates a gravitational field. Their mass defines the motion of others. Think of taboos. Think of inherited power structures. Think of beliefs so old no one questions them anymore, and yet every action in the system bends around them. Still. But shaping all movement, even in the human body, we find stillness that generates force. Your core muscles, when engaged, don't visibly move, but they create the tension that allows all other movement to happen. The more stable the center, the more power the limbs can express. The mass in stillness becomes the engine of motion elsewhere, and in storytelling. One of humanity's deepest tools. There's always a character, a truth, a hidden weight that doesn't change, doesn't speak, doesn't move, but alters everything. The unsaid sentence, the silent room, the moment before impact. Stillness has mass. Stillness has gravity. But here's the paradox. We associate impact with movement. We equate presence with action. We expect that power will always be loud, fast, kinetic. And yet, some of the most powerful forces in the universe don't move. Mass, by definition, is resistance to acceleration. It's not motion, it's the capacity to resist motion. It defines how hard something is to move, how much force it takes to shift it. And the greater the mass, the more still it becomes. Motion is flashy. Mass is silent. And sometimes the things that don't change everything else. So what does this mean for you? Maybe that unresolved feeling that doesn't seem active is still shaping your every step. Maybe the person in the room who says nothing is still pulling the entire conversation. Maybe that one idea you thought didn't matter is holding up your whole belief system. And maybe, just maybe, stillness isn't the absence of energy. It's a different kind of energy, one that pulls instead of pushes. Mass without motion is the paradox that warns you. Don't mistake silence for emptiness. Don't assume motion equals meaning. Sometimes the thing that never moves is the thing everything else orbits. You've spent your whole life believing that you observe the world, that you are the subject, the camera, the lens. You look at trees, cities, faces, data, and try to make sense of it all. You are the one doing the watching, but what if that's backwards? What if the world is watching you? This is World Watch's mind, a paradox that flips the direction of perception. It asks, what if the mind isn't just observing the world, but being shaped, filtered, and even anticipated by it? What if reality doesn't just sit there passively, but responds to your attention like a mirror with its own gaze? Let's begin where science gets queasy, in quantum physics. The double-slit experiment, already infamous, reveals that particles behave differently when observed. If you measure which slit a photon goes through, it behaves like a particle. Don't measure, and it behaves like a wave. But here's the twist. It's not your measurement that seems to matter. It's your capacity to know, even the potential of knowledge alters the outcome. It's as if the particle is reacting not to the physical environment, but to the mind's ability to extract information from it. Not you watching it, but it watching what you might know. Now enter the observer effect more broadly in behavioral science. Humans act differently when they know they're being watched. This isn't news. But deeper studies show that even imagined observation changes. Behavior. People placed in rooms with a photo of eyes on the wall become more honest, more generous. Their nervous systems respond to symbolic surveillance. Even when they know no one's there, your mind, knowing the world might be watching, begins to shift. But what if the world actually is? In certain theories of neurophenomenology, the boundary between observer and observed dissolves. Consciousness is not seen as a one-way mirror, but as an interactive field. Your perception of the world is shaped by your expectations, memories, and context, but the world also reflects those expectations back at you, modifying itself in real time. Consider this. Your eyes don't passively absorb light. They make rapid, unconscious predictions about what they're about to see, and only then process incoming data. The visual cortex doesn't wait. It offers a model, then updates it. You see what you expect, and the world, through its feedback, either confirms or surprises you. It's not just that you're watching the world. The world is correcting your internal predictions. Now, turn to social psychology. When you walk through a city with fear, you're more likely to notice hostile faces, dark alleys, signs of threat. Your fear filters your vision, and in doing so, you bring out more fear from the world. You walk differently. You make different eye contact. Others react. Your mental state changes your environment, and your environment adjusts your mind. It's a loop, a dialogue, a dance of projection and reflection. In spiritual traditions, this isn't paradoxical. It's fundamental. In Buddhism, Hinduism, and some mystical strands of Christianity and Islam, the world is described as Maya, illusion. Not because it's fake, but because it's responsive. It appears solid, but is made of mind stuff. It shows you what you need to see, what you're ready to see. In other words, it watches you, even in artificial intelligence. This pattern repeats. As recommendation algorithms watch your behavior, they begin to predict you. Then, more subtly, they begin to shape you. You don't just observe content. Content observes. Your preferences adapts and feeds back what you're becoming. You think you're watching the feed. The feed is watching you. Now, consider this. When you stare at the night sky, you're not just seeing light from billions of years ago. You're participating in a relationship with the cosmos. Your act of seeing, thinking, wondering, puts your mind into the world. Your consciousness is a data point in a vast field of cause and response. The stars don't twinkle for you, but your awareness of them is a thread in the fabric of reality. So what's the paradox? You thought the world was neutral, passive, stage for your mind to play upon. But the more we look, the more we see that the world responds to how it's perceived. It changes based on your attention, your beliefs, your gaze. Not in a fantasy way, not in a you create your own reality. CLHAQ. But in a deeper, subtler way, where the world, like a mirror, doesn't just reflect your face. It reflects your mind. And if that's true, then every moment is co-authored. Every experience is shared, not just by you and other people, but by you and reality itself. World Watch's mind isn't just poetic. It's personal, because it means you're never alone with your thoughts. Not really. Because something, perhaps everything, is watching them, too. Do you like to think there's one of you? A single eye sitting behind your eyes, steering the ship. A mind that watches, reflects, reacts. A narrator of experience. You assume this observer is stable, continuous, whole, but the more closely you look, the more that you begins to fracture. This is self-splits observer. The paradox that erupts when your mind tries to observe itself and finds not unity, but multiplicity. Not a single self behind the curtain, but a crowd of shifting perspectives, each watching, each being watched, none ever quite in charge. Let's begin with a brain-breaking fact from neuroscience. There is no single place in your brain where the self lives. There's no CEO neuron, no spotlight of consciousness. Instead, the self emerges from multiple parallel processes: vision, memory, emotion, attention, all operating semi-independently and blending into what feels like one continuous experience. But it's not. When scientists use split brain experiments, where the corpus callosum, the bridge between left and right hemispheres, is severed, strange things happen. A patient may say they believe one thing, while their left hand writes the opposite. One hemisphere sees a face, the other house. One laughs at a joke, the other doesn't get it. The observer, the I, splits. There isn't one consciousness. There are two, both experiencing, both unaware of the other's autonomy. Now imagine, if that's true even in extreme surgery cases, how many fragments of you are active right now? In everyday cognition, we already split. There's the you that's thinking, the you that's watching yourself think, and the you that wonders why you're watching yourself thinking. A constant loop of self-reflection, each layer peeling back another observer. Try it. Ask yourself, who is thinking this thought? Then ask, who is asking that question? And again, who is listening to this answer? Keep going. You won't find a final I, only mirrors. Watching mirrors endlessly, even in psychology. The concept of a unified self is beginning to collapse. We have different selves that activate in different contexts. A social self, a private self, an ideal self. You behave differently with your parents than with strangers. You might even argue with yourself internally, like two voices with separate priorities. This isn't dysfunction. It's how consciousness works. Your sense of unity is a narrative, a helpful fiction. Your brain, like a clever screenwriter, stitches together these fragments into something that feels whole. But it's not. And in meditation traditions, especially in Buddhism and Vedanta, this has been known for centuries. They teach that the I is an illusion, not a lie, but a construct. A convenient mask built from memory, thought, language. When you sit still and observe your mind long enough, you find nothing. No fixed observer, no one behind a curtain. Just thoughts, observing other thoughts, pretending to be a self. Even modern experiments in phenomenology show that the act of attention is slippery. When you focus on your breathing, who is focusing? Is it the same part of you that feels the breath? Or is one part of the mind watching another? Every time you try to grasp the self, it jumps behind the next curtain. And here's the existential gut punch. If the observer is made of parts, then who is in control? If you are not a fixed self, but a collection of shifting processes, then what do you mean when you say, I choose? It's not that free will disappears, but it becomes murky, distributed, recursive. Your preferences are shaped by other selves within you. Some inherited, some learned, some still emerging. You are a democracy, or a war, or a theater where no actor realizes they're being watched by another. This is why people say things like, I knew it was a bad idea, but I did it anyway. Two selves, one watching, one acting. And sometimes neither wins. Self-splits observer is not just a philosophical. It's a daily experience. It's why you feel torn, why you hesitate, why you second guess, why you talk to yourself, because you're not just one person. You're a whole conversation. And yet, here's the paradox within the paradox. You still feel like one. You experience your life as a single stream. Even though the river has many currents, the mind can be fragmented. But the illusion of unity is incredibly convincing. Maybe necessarily so. Because without that illusion, you'd freeze. You'd question every impulse. You'd loop in every decision. The self may be fractured, but believing in it keeps the machine running. So what are you really? A mind pretending to be a person? A story told by neurons? A knot of processes that takes itself personally? Or maybe, just maybe, you're not the observer. You're the observation. Not the self behind the scenes, but the scenes watching themselves. You've reached the end of the spiral, or so it seems. You've questioned time, causality, selfhood, and even the world's stability. And now, at the bottom of it all, you're left with one final assumption, that there is something here. That being existence itself is the realest thing of all, that whatever else may be an illusion, the simple fact that something must be true. But what if being itself is the illusion? This is being creates illusion, the final paradox, where the foundation you've stood on all along begins to ripple and distort. It's not that illusions hide being. It's that being generates illusions. That existence, far from being. The solution to the mystery might be its most elaborate trick. Let's start with a strange fact. The universe may be made of information, not matter. Physicists like John Archibald Wheeler proposed the idea of it from bit, the notion. That reality arises from binary, yes, no, from particles or fields. At the base of the cosmos lies code, not clay. Everything you see, trees, planets, your body, your thoughts, may be expressions of underlying informational logic. The way pixels on a screen are shaped by invisible instructions. Being is the display. Illusion is the medium. You're watching reality, but what you're really seeing is the interpretation of something deeper. And maybe stranger dot now zoom into the human experience. Your entire reality is filtered through your brain. You don't experience raw data. You experience a simulation. Your eyes don't see light. They convert it. Your ears don't hear sound. They decode vibrations. Your brain doesn't give you the world. It gives you a world. A world shaped by memory, culture, biology, attention. And most of all, survival. You don't see what's real. You see what's useful. This is called the interface theory of perception. It proposes that evolution has not favored organisms who see reality as it is, but those who see reality in ways that help them survive and reproduce dots of what you call being this solid. Sensory world is actually a hallucination shaped by utility, a convincing one, but still an illusion. Now let's talk about dreams. You've had dreams that felt utterly real. Emotions, logic, identity, all present until you wake up. Then you say, it wasn't real. But here's the twist. During the dream, you didn't know it wasn't real. You couldn't. You accepted its logic. You believed it's being dots. So what if waking life is just another layer? What if consciousness is always trapped inside one simulation or another, unable to know what's beyond, because knowing requires a mind, and the mind is part of the illusion? Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. But Eastern traditions say, I think, therefore I imagine I am. In Buddhism, the self and the world arise interdependently, like a reflection in a mirror that appears only when someone looks. In Advaita Vedanta, the world is Maya, not unreal, but appearing within consciousness like a mirage in a desert. Being isn't denied, but it is reframed, not the ground of truth, but the canvas of appearance. Even in modern cosmology, this paradox creeps in. Theories like the holographic principle suggest that our 3D universe may be encoded on a 2D surface, that what feels solid and deep is just a projection, like a dream cast from the edge of reality, and then comes the most unnerving possibility of all, simulation theory, that our entire existence is a rendered construct, a vast computational illusion, perhaps for study, perhaps for entertainment, perhaps for reasons we'll never comprehend. If this is true, then being is not truth. It's design. Intentional or accidental, it doesn't matter. What matters is it's not real in the way you think. But here's the paradox within the paradox. Even if being is an illusion, it's an illusion that creates itself. A dream that dreams the dreamer. A thought that gives birth to a thinker. Your experience of reality is real to you. Your suffering, your joy, your confusion, they happen. Even if their source is unknowable. Even if their substance is empty dot. And so we arrive at the recursive edge. Being creates illusion, but illusion creates being, and there's no outside the loop. Only echoes. Only appearances. Only now dot. So what does that mean for you? It means the floor has disappeared beneath your feet, and yet you're still standing. It means nothing may be truly real, but you still feel, you still ask. You still wonder, and maybe that's the point, not to find the truth at the bottom, but to realize there may be no bottom, only layers, only stories. Only paradoxes that keep unfolding. Being creates illusion is the final trick. It doesn't give you answers. It hands you a mirror and then questions whether mirrors reflect anything at all. But still, you return to the question, if none of this is real, why does it matter so much? And the answer, that question is the most real thing you've ever had. So here we are, 3 hours later, a few dozen paradoxes deeper. And the floor beneath your thoughts doesn't feel quite so stable, does it? You began this journey thinking you were about to learn about bizarre experiments, maybe some quirky old psychology studies or oddball physics anomalies. You expected weirdness, sure, but weirdness with a boundary, something that eventually lands. Instead, what you've uncovered is a quiet unraveling of the most basic beliefs you carry about time, truth, perception, self, choice, reality, even existence itself. Each paradox didn't just show you a contradiction. It showed you a mirror, then broke it, then asked if the reflection was ever really you. Let's rewind. You saw that particles behave differently when watched, that minds lie to themselves, that choices may be echoes of past causes dressed up as decisions. You discovered that trauma can live in silence, that the past can invent memory, and that belief might literally sculpt the laws of your biology. You learned that some experiments, once dismissed as strange or fringe, revealed something profoundly uncomfortable. Reality isn't fixed. It's a negotiation between expectation and response, between mind and matter, between what is and what thinks it is, and perhaps the most disturbing revelation of all. You're not a fixed observer, watching from a safe distance. You are inside the loop. You are the loop. You are the observer who is observed. The self that splits. The being that creates its own illusion. The experiments weren't just about science. They were about you. And what they exposed is that you are stranger than you know. Not broken. Not wrong. Just recursive. You watch yourself. You think about thinking, you believe things, and those beliefs rewrite what's possible. You chase certainty and find mirrors, and yet you keep going. Why? Because the mind isn't meant to solve itself. It's meant to wonder, to loop, to question, to experience the dizziness of paradox, and still wake up the next day and try again. And maybe that's the real gift of these bizarre experiments, not that they give you answers, but that they fracture the illusion of certainty just enough to let reality breathe in a world obsessed with clarity. With logic, with control, paradox is rebellion. It reminds you that there are edges to knowing, and that those edges shimmer like heat rising off asphalt. So now, maybe nothing, maybe everything. You go back to your life, make breakfast, pay bills, forget half of what you heard here, but somewhere deep in the machinery of your perception, a glitch remains, a little crack in the lens, a hesitation, a whisper. What if none of this is what it seems? And from that whisper comes space to imagine, space to laugh, space to accept that not knowing is not failure. It's freedom. So here's your final experiment, the one you were unknowingly part of all along. Observe yourself, not just once, but constantly. Not to find the answer, but to notice the loop. To notice how strange it is to be aware of awareness. To think about thinking. To exist at all. That's the weirdest experiment of them all, and you're living it.